English is not my first language, so please excuse any weird phrasing. This happened a few years ago, and I don't remember all the details clearly. When I was 20, I worked as a sort of carer for an autistic person, Sam, who at the time was in his late tweens. We'd meet for a few hours once a week and go to the playgrounds, go hiking, or generally just hang out. One time, we were at the playground. I noticed a man looking at the kids. He didn't seem to be there with any particular kid, which is why I noticed him there in the first place. When Sam was done playing at the playground, we headed to the tram to go hiking a bit before I was done at work. The man followed us, and I saw him enter the same tram as us, with no kid in tow. Thought it might be a happenstance, but found it odd. Didn't think too much of it while the tram was driving. When we reached our destination, I noticed him leave at the same time as us, but by another door again. Could have been a happenstance. But now I'm very aware of this guy. My gut tells me that he's following us. To get to the hiking trail, we have to go through a neighborhood. As we start walking, so does the guy. I get more and more stressed as we're getting closer to the woods. I don't want to leave the safety of the streets while this guy is following us. I tell Sam, I don't want to go hiking today. Let's turn around. Thankfully, he's okay with this. And as we turn, I see the guy go down the side street. He stops about 20 meters down the street and just stands there, looking innocently in the other direction as we walk past him. When we've walked by him and a bit down the road, he starts walking again, still following us. Now I know for sure he's following us. I'm freaking out, yet still trying to calm down so as to not aggravate Sam. We stop by another playground for a bit, but as I promised him we'll go to the dam at the end of the hiking trail, we don't stay there for long. Luckily there's another way to get to the dam, just walking by the road. However, there's a walking tunnel going under the tram line, where we'd be out of view for a moment. I want to run through the tunnel, but Sam refuses, so we walk together. We get to the other side before the guy following us enters the tunnel. When we get to the dam, I take notes on my phone, describing the guy following us, intending to go to the police with it the next day. I let Sam throw rocks into the water for a while until he gets thirsty, and we decide to walk to the store. The store is close to the bus stop too, so we catch the bus to get him home after we get him something to drink. I don't remember much of the walk to the store. I assume we went through the tunnel again, but I can't be sure. There's yet another way to get back to the tram stop, and from there, back to the road. And if memory serves me correctly, we'd have to pass the guy to get back up the road again. I don't remember much from the store either, but I think the guy didn't come into the store. He just waited for us outside. When we were done at the store, it was about time to get Sam home, so we head to the bus stop. The guy decides to stand next to me while we're waiting at the bus, and I'm calmly freaking out again. I can't show this guy where Sam lives. What do I do? At the same time, I realize all my descriptions of him are based on his clothes, and my phone has a camera. I open the Notes app and sneak a photo of the guy to go with the description of him. The photo comes out kind of crap. I open the camera app on my phone and take another photo, and the phone makes a camera sound. The guy apparently realizes I know he's been following us, because he gives a sheepish grin and sort of a half wave of his hand before leaving the bus stop. Just like that, he walks away. I'm still slightly freaking out, and I make absolutely sure he's not sneaking around the bus stop. He doesn't get on the same bus as us. I keep looking over my shoulder as we're walking from the bus to Sam's home. Once I've ushered him in, I tell his mom what happened, and that I don't think Sam knows. But if he has a reaction later that day, that might be why. I call my mom on my way home, just to have someone to talk to. I tell her what happened and that I'm shaken up by it, even though I don't think the guy was after me. And he had stopped following us. I still don't want to take the wooden path to my apartment when I get off the bus. I went to the police with a picture the next day and tell them my side of the story. I don't think anything ever came of it, as nothing illegal really happened. I've never seen this guy again, and I hope I never will. This happened a few years ago while I was still in my hometown. I was going for a late night walk in the early AMs, which is fairly common, and I always felt relatively safe and street smart to avoid bad situations. My walks would often take me all over town, though a favorite haunt was a park we had down by the river. Though it was known as a hangout spot for weirdos and druggies so late, I've walked there plenty of times and never encountered any problems, so I went down there again, all the same to enjoy the breezy river air. The walk to the park itself was uneventful, and so we'll get to the anatomy of the park itself, something vital to realize the magnitude of the issue. The park was unfenced and easy to get into, open to the public, and looking from the park itself, you could see an opening to the beach and river along it. There needed to be an opening because the beach was a bit of a drop-off. You had to take a moderate step down from the concrete supporting the park itself just to get onto the sand and away from this opening. The distance between the concrete steps and beach became such a length that they needed fencing so as to prevent people from falling and hurting themselves. Basically, everywhere not beach led to a major drop-off into an only sparse line of sand or muddy area, with the only thing separating you from the drop was either fencing or a major tree line. So as I'm walking through the park, there's nobody around, and it's absolutely silent until the hooting of an owl breaks it. I'm surprised, because owls were rare in those parts and at that time of year, but I ignore it and continue to walk as it continues hooting. As I murmured closer to where it sounded, I noticed two things: that the owl sounded like it was in pain, and that it was on the ground. I get really concerned for it and want to help it, so I start going over to where the hooting is coming from, though tentatively, because even right then there was a weird chill climbing up my spine, though I couldn't say why. I get closer and it sounds louder, more hurt, and it's definitely on the ground, in the same place. I keep walking closer and hear it right behind the tree line, after the drop-off point. From more of the park's layout, anywhere past the tree line led to a drop that was just this thin line of earth separating you from the water, like a gorge. If you just jumped down, you weren't relatively stuck because you couldn't go forward from the water. Climbing back up was nightmarish for all the roots of trees jutting out, and going left or right would have forced you to follow an extremely narrow path with little room. This owl was right behind the drop-off point, so even getting closer, I couldn't see it. The owl kept hooting, and I got to right in front of the trees, and I could hear it right under me. All I had to do was jump down, and I would see it or be able to get it, but I didn't. The weird feeling, this chill up my back, kept getting higher and higher and more intense the closer I got, and my conscious brain finally picked up on why. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they all hooted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It hooted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It sounded again, and again, and again. And I finally realized why I felt so creeped out, and why my subconscious brain was screaming at me to run away. It wasn't an owl. It was a recording. A recording of a wounded owl on the ground, waiting for anyone to come with the intention of helping it. Past the tree line obscuring their vision, past a drop-off point you couldn't climb back up from, and on a path you couldn't run at all, where someone, anyone, could be waiting. It was a lure meant to lead someone into a trap, and I suddenly felt very, very cold and clammy, and like I was being watched. I immediately turned and started speed walking away, taking the nearest exit out of the park and onto as manly lit streets as I could, all the way home. constantly checking to see if I was being followed. I stayed up the entire night, fully paranoid and looking out all the windows I could see if anyone was there, though nothing bad ever did happen, and no one ever tried to get me. The next night I went back with my sister's cell phone with the intent to call the police and report it if I heard it again. But no hooting ever occurred, and upon a more thorough inspection, nobody seemed to be lying in wait. I kept an eye on the newspaper for a bit after that too, to check if anyone else reported similar happenings or, God forbid, if anyone got hurt in a similar incident. But nobody ever did, and it never happened to me again. That's the end of my story, and while I do continue to take night walks, I always carry a weapon on me to defend myself, and always make a point to trust my instincts. I really don't want to post this, as I would have been perceived as insane, or someone with a warped or false view of reality. Here I go anyway. As I'm done keeping this to myself, I know I can share this here as it's anonymous and will not have any personal repercussions due to this confession. This event unfolded over a year ago in my final year of high school. I live in a rural wooded area within the US. On the public bus on the way home from school, a man sat across the aisle. He was developmentally challenged in some way. The man making strange noises and looking at me, his face distorted in an uncomfortable manner. In response, I would stare at the floor awkwardly. Situations similar to these made me very uncertain and slightly distressed. My anxiety disorder probably didn't help either. Suddenly, the middle-aged, overweight, frightened-looking man darted his hand out and gripped my forearm tightly, creasing my uniform. He made a strange noise and looked in my eyes. I heard an unqueering tone to the noise and saw confusion in his eyes. At this point, I felt sorry for the stranger and asked him, "What's wrong?" My voice cracking twice due to my nerves. He slowly let go of my arm and sat back, looking forward with a smile slowly cracking across his face. This sent a shiver down my spine, but I soon forgot the man existed before I even got to my stop. The following few days were quite uneventful. The next time I saw the man was when I was walking to my friend's house. I dropped my phone as I was crossing a grassy field near my home. Turning and crouching to pick it up, I spotted the same strange man about 50 yards behind me. He suddenly stopped and stared. At least I think he was. I could barely recognize him from the distance due to my poor eyesight. Thoroughly creeped out, I hurried along to my friend's house, making sure no one was behind me. The next couple of days, I would have the same feeling of someone watching me. On dark nights especially, I would turn around sharply to try to catch a glimpse of the man, but never did. Eventually, I convinced myself it was my anxiety making me paranoid and told myself to get over it. Didn't put my mind at ease much. I know I should have listened to my gut. About a fortnight after first meeting this man on the bus, something fucking terrifying happened. I was walking my small King Charles dog through the small trail in the woods, about a mile from my house. I walk him nearly every day down the trail as he's getting old and fat, and it's needed for him. There's a small river that I allow him to play fetch in. The incident happened by the path parallel to the river. Now and then, I tend to look over my shoulder when I'm walking to see if anyone was walking behind me out of habit. I nearly fell over when I saw the man about 20 feet behind me. I ripped out my earphones and spun around to face him, shouting at him to what he wants. He replies with the same incoherent vowel sounds and started to walk quickly towards me. I sprinted with my dog in my hands, not even feeling his weight as I ran. I quickly jumped down into a small concrete drain built into the riverbank. Water seeped up through my socks and my jeans, but I didn't care. I focused on calming my breathing as I heard the man's footsteps approaching. My dog started barking, and I closed my hand around his snout and tried to muffle his growls and grunts. Directly above me, I heard, "I told you it's real," as clear as day. It was the man. I could recognize his voice, although he was just making noises before I could still recognize his voice. He jumped down and I froze in fear, water splashing over me and the dog, who was now cowering. The man turned with a sharp piece of pipe in his left hand. "Love me," he wheezed with a grin painting on his face. Then all I heard was blood rushing past my ears as I leaped up and kicked him as hard as I could in the stomach. He stumbled in the water and fell on his back. I ignored him and used his body to jump onto the bank, my Vans crunching into his nose. I kept sprinting back towards the road, forgetting the existence of my dog while doing so. He was okay and found me later as I waited on the main road. Needless to say, I called the police, and turns out the guy was never found. I never seen him again on the bus or anything, and I'm constantly on edge now. We haven't moved, and I'm still unsure if I'm crazy or not. If you're reading this, creepy, disabled, or insane dude, let's not meet again. Back in my freshman year of college, I was a fairly trusting person and probably got myself into a lot of bad situations. I was pretty dumb and very lucky. However, there was one incident that will always remind me to have better situational awareness. I was walking back from my dorm from a class in the early evening, speed walking because I had to go to another class at the night and wanted time to relax beforehand. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, and as I passed a very tall, broadly built guy on the sidewalk as I was coming up from my dorm, I only took notice of him for a second because he was walking rather slowly and taking up the middle of the sidewalk. I had to step off into the grass to get around, but I don't think I did this rudely. I probably would have forgotten him entirely if the following events didn't occur. I crossed the street and walk up toward the hall's entrance and swap my key. They warn us not to allow others to tailgate because people unauthorized into the building can get in. No one followed this rule, and I didn't want to ever be rude and close the door on someone right behind me. That's when I noticed the guy I had passed earlier was close enough for me to let him grab the door and let him in, which I allowed, thinking again nothing of it, because it's something I always did. I lived on the 5th floor, which was a girls' only floor. The genders were separated by floors, so floor 4 and floor 6 would be the men's floor nearest to mine. He and I got on the elevator with a few other people. I pressed the button for the 5th floor and noticed he didn't press any numbers. That's fine, maybe he was getting off on the floors before mine, like the others in the elevator. We stop at the 2nd floor and a couple leaves. He doesn't get off. We stop again at the 4th floor and the remaining person leaves. He stays, and we're alone. That's when I start to feel a bit funny. He wasn't standing too close or anything, but he seemed to be looking anywhere but at me as we rode up to the 5th floor. I did think it was odd, but could be explained by a mere coincidence. We stopped on my floor and I was to leave first, relieved to empty the awkward space and continue on my way. Now, my hall was a Y-shaped building. Upon leaving the elevator, you either went left or right, down 2 separate wings. I turned left as my dorm is about in the center of the left wing. That's when I noticed he was following behind me, and even when I picked up my pace, he kept up with me. Being taller, he wasn't exactly hurrying, but this is what really pushed my paranoia. It really felt he was walking on his own, with a destination in mind, and he could easily pass me if he wanted to. But no, he maintained a steady distance from me. As I was being followed, I started to panic, and when I reached the door, I realized how empty my floor was at the time of the day. He was going to reach me just as I opened the door, and that's when I decided it would be better to stay in the public space and scream if I needed to. I could also run further down the hall and down the stairs at the end of the wing. If I opened my dorm door, it would be too easy for him to come in, lock the door, and overpower me. I always kept my keys in my pocket, but as he approached, I instead swung my backpack off my back. so I could leave it if I needed to run, and fumbled around inside as if I was searching for my keys. I don't know why I was trying to act cool, as if I wasn't scared, and that I wasn't opening the door because I was terrified of him, especially since maybe he might pass me and actually be visiting someone further down the hall, and I would look silly then. That's when he stopped just 2 yards away from me, past all the other doors, stopping at mine. He stood there for a moment and I ignored him, hand fumbling uselessly around the inside of my backpack. I did not look up, and then he turned and walked back down the way he came, and I heard the elevator door open, feeling safe to open my dorm door without fear he might come charging back down the hallway. I hurriedly got inside and locked the door. I immediately called my mother just in case. Needed to feel not only totally alone since my roommate was not home. Later I calmed down and waited until my roommate returned. I skipped my next class because I didn't want to walk in the dark. Initially, I had felt good about my quick thinking, but then I realized one really bad important detail. I should have kept walking. I should have stopped at my door because now he knew which dorm was mine. I haven't seen him since, but strange Trude followed me back to my dorm when I was a freshman girl. Well, that's not me. This is long. I apologize in advance. I am so immensely grateful for the sub because I find this story really difficult to explain to people. I questioned myself for a long time, but finally came to the conclusion that I was, in fact, stalked. It all started when I began a new job as a lifeguard and swim instructor at a university pool. The first person I ever started a shift was with this guy named Harry. He was fairly odd, quite socially awkward, and had a quirky sense of humor. However, after the first couple of weeks of work, Harry started to strike up a pretty deep conversation with me. He asked me a lot of personal information about my family, how I grew up, and what I enjoy. My relationship with my now husband. This didn't strike me as particularly odd, as I'm very extroverted, social human, and I love talking to people about my life. His questions started to have a lot more depth, and as he began asking me deep questions about the meanings of life, my faith, and my beliefs. I'm a Christian, so I saw this as a great opportunity to explain what I believe and why. Harry began to open up about his family life in a way that made me uncomfortable. He described his parents in a way that made me feel like I had no emotional connection to them, even though they were clearly emotionally connected to him. He would describe his mother as being passive and stupid, unwilling to stand up for herself, and his father as living in fear by over-controlling Harry's actions. As time went on, the way he talked got more extreme. He kept talking about how he was different from everyone, and how he was a monster. A few times after our late-night shifts, he would drive me home to my house. I often walked, but I took him up on his offers to drive when I could. He would talk to me about a lot during our shifts, which, as it is, isn't the smartest thing to do as a lifeguard. One time, a lady hopped into the deep end who didn't know how to swim. I saw it and ran to the scene, but he just watched. I asked him later why he didn't come to help me, but he shrugged it off like it wasn't a big deal. He also began to self-disclose a lot of personal information that I felt like we weren't at the right level of friendship for. He told me that he was a virgin, and then told me that he wanted to have sex so he knew how it felt. He texted me when he lost his virginity, without any protection by the way, and said that he gave the girl pleasure, but that he didn't feel anything, and just finished on his own. A few weeks into his relationship with this girl, he texted me saying that he thought he had AIDS, which he didn't have. All of this information might seem like unnecessary details, I know, but they're details that I embedded in my mind that make me wonder how I could have missed some of the signs. Harry continued to text me about his emotions and lack of empathy for others. He also talked about his plans to leave his parents. He lived at home and to move to Australia. He had several $1,000s saved up, which he occasionally made me think he would give to me. In a few conversations once, he casually mentioned, "I don't know what to do with my money." And then later went, "Man, I could just give it all to you." He said it half joking and half serious, but with a tone that made me wonder if he understood the gravity of what he was saying. I was an engaged college student trying to pay for a wedding and live on more than just my rent every month. He knew that very well, but lorded his money over me without a thought that I might be a cruel thing to do. He continuously talked to me about his empty property that he had keys to, and how he'd like to take his friends there to explore the house. I don't think much of it, but I started to get really weird feeling when the things he was telling me. I was open with my fiance about the text he was sending me, and the types of questions he was asking me. We both agree it wasn't comfortable for either of us. He continued to text me late at night saying that I was his only friend. He often talked about his mental health and how he wanted to end things. He also talked about how smart he was and that he was at genius level intelligence and everyone was stupid and empathetic. Many of our conversations circulated around these topics, as well as his sex life and some of the dumb decisions he was making at risk of his own health and others. The turning point happened late one night, at 1 a.m. or so, when he sent me a text asking his hypothetical question that I knew he wasn't being hypothetical. He said, "If I drive over and knock on your door, will you say, 'Harry, it's too late, go home'? Or will you either willingly let me into your house or exit your house to take on the world with me?" I was confused and asked him to elaborate, and he said that he had keys to this house and asked if I wanted to explore it with him. It should be noted that the house was in a very sketchy part of town. I said no, and I told him that I wouldn't be very comfortable doing that with anyone, especially on that side of town. However, I got the niggling feeling that he was at my door, and sure enough, when I looked out my window, I saw him walking back to his vehicle from my doorsteps. That's when the most distinctive moment that I thought to myself, he might be a stalker. I had a panic room and called my fiance. We were long distance and pulled my roommate into my room so that I could explain the situation to them. In the following weeks, Harry continued to text me daily, if not hourly, asking me where I was and if we could meet up somewhere. I often lied or made up an excuse about why I couldn't. Eventually, he said he would be leaving for Australia and was planning on deleting all social media. He asked me for my email address and any other possible way of staying in touch with him, which I very guiltily did not give him. Finally, he left. I felt so much relief and felt like I wasn't being watched anymore or had to worry about something happening to me. It took me a really long time to acknowledge that he was a stalker. I decided to ask some female coworkers about him, especially ones I had heard he was closer to. The first thing I noticed was that there was a type. We were all blonde, curvy, and strong-willed women. We all had the same kinds of interactions with him. We would listen to him and have conversations with him, and he would text us late at night. Later, I brought up his stalkerish tendencies to a coworker who had a similar experience, and she mentioned that the house he kept referring to was where he would take women to have sex with him. There were many moments I wondered if he might be a sociopath, possibly higher functioning, or had some other mental health issues going on, besides major depression. He was isolated as a child in a very strict religious environment, and wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Anyway, maybe that's way too much information for the sub, but I needed a place to vent with people who understand what it feels like to be stalked. It might not be a particularly extreme example, but it haunts me to this day. This all happened about exactly a year ago. A few years ago, I worked in a small local pet store during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. This store kind of specializes in saltwater fish and reptiles in particular. So it wasn't too odd to have newbie reptile or aquarium people or people looking to just learn some more before actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man would come in and start asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him the first couple of times he came in, and answered his questions for about an hour and a half to 2 hours each time he came in. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at other animals, refusing to talk to my other coworkers standing right next to me. He was definitely a dude with a creepy vibe, but after about the third time this guy came in and questioned me about bearded dragons' mating habits for an hour, we all started getting uncomfortable. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and let them too come hang out the shop while he was there because he was just so persistent about talking to me, and only about the bearded dragons with the occasional, "Do you have a boyfriend?" or pickup line. I told him I wasn't interested each time and told him I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't. At first we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to social awkwardness, but it started getting scary when he'd come in, look for me, not find me, but he'd find my car, with significant damage at the time and decorated, very obviously my car back then, and just hang out outside the shop. My boss/manager started telling me to hide out in our back employees only rat/mouse room when he'd come in. My friends weren't weirded out. I was getting uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actually trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in. I ended up quitting that job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh buddy, we were in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off of his ex-property in a local town by police, came back to the house that same night and murdered her when she didn't show up for work. Her coworkers called for welfare check. Police get there. He answers the door and tells them his name is Zeus. It most definitely was not his real name. Lets the police in. They find her in the bathtub on a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for trial on our state. And his interviews/clips of news people questioning him while the police are escorting him to the court are just bonkers. He tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and had been released from prison before moving to our area. Trust your instincts about people you interact with. People are wild. Let's definitely not meet again. It was 2006, and I was a student attending the American College Dance Festival, which was held at Boston University that year. I was 20, and I went to a small college in another state. There were about 10 of us who went on the trip. My college flew us out to Boston, but didn't have the funds for hotel accommodation, so we all stayed with anyone we knew in Boston. One of my best friends from high school was studying at another college in Boston, so I crashed at her apartment for the festival. Each day we would start with some dance classes early in the morning on the BU campus. I took the subway to get from my friend's place to campus, and I had to take the very first train in the morning to get there on time. The nearest subway stop was one of those very small and simple ones where there's just a platform with stairs leading up to the street on either side. No employees or kiosks. I had little experience in navigating large cities and subway travel, and I was nervous to get around this way, especially since the early hour and the small stop meant I was often there alone. So, when I saw a worker in the MTA, Massachusetts Transportation Authority, vest sweeping snow off the steps one morning, I was immediately relieved. Boy, was I wrong. I went down the stairs and sat on the bench on the platform alone. Shortly afterwards, the worker came and stood uncomfortably close to me with his broom. He kept looking at me out of the corner of his eye. I thought this behavior was creepy, and I noted to myself that he obviously had not had time to finish cleaning the snow off the steps. I was getting really tense when a couple, who were being loud and apparently drunk from the night before, came down and waited on the opposite bench. The worker didn't move, kept side-eyeing me. The train came and was already pretty full. I grabbed one of the last remaining seats, and the MTA worker boarded the same car and stood near me. I could see his reflection in the window of the subway car as he stared at me for the whole ride. He didn't seem to be aware I could see him staring. When I got off at my stop, he got off too and started following me. Luckily, my dancer's legs propelled me through a big crowd of people, and I lost him as he followed me off the train. I had the deepest creepy feeling about the whole thing. Still gives me the willies over a decade later. This happened today, and I don't know if I'm more weirded out or creeped out. I was taking the bus from work past what is generally known as a pretty sketchy area in my city. I sat in the back of the bus on the second last row, where a man was sitting behind me. Pretty normal stuff. I was just minding my own business, reasonably tired after work. All of a sudden, I hear the man speaking very clearly and pretty loudly, saying all kinds of, how should I put it, intimate things. I figured I shouldn't pry. He's probably on the phone with his girlfriend or leaving her a message on her receiver. This continues for the entire duration of the bus ride, 15 plus minutes, with almost no breaks in between talking. When it's my stop, I get up to get off. I turn around and see he's been talking to me the entire time. He was staring directly at me and talking to me. No phone in hand, no anything. Reasonably weirded out, I tried to check out. In my country, you have these cards you use for public transportation. You check in when you get on the bus, train, subway, and check out when you get off, paying according to distance and time traveled. So the thing is, if you don't hold it at the exact angle it wants, the motherfucker will beep and make the saddest error sound, telling you that you have to try to check out again. The guy, still observing me, looks me up and down very non-discreetly, smiles and says, "Relax, girl. Don't rush. Take your time." I say nothing and hurry off the bus as quick as I can. So, weird guy harassing me in broad daylight. Let's not meet again. P.S. When he said the last line, I swear, his face made him look like Lenny personified. I'm not entirely sure this belongs here, but redirect me if I'm wrong. When I was about 8 years old, my sister, who was 18 at the time, brought home her new boyfriend, who I'll call C. He was around 30 years old, which concerned my mom, but it wasn't abnormal for my sister to do this. At this point in her life, she was falling rapidly into a deep depression. Drugs and one-night stands were very common at this time for her, so an actual boyfriend seemed better than my mom not knowing where she was every night. C was very nice to us, and especially to me. He and my sister took me to different places. He bought quite expensive gifts for me, and my 8-year-old self liked him very much for those, of course. This will be relevant later. I even went to his house for a sleepover, but of course my sister was there with me. I should tell you, I never got any creepy vibes from him. He never said anything weird or creepy as far as I can remember. Fast forward to the day they broke up. It's quite a blur, so I don't remember all of it. But I do remember him showing up at our house and my sister refusing to let him in. My mom wasn't home, but it was still light out, and luckily we were very close with our neighbors. My other sister, she was around 13 or 14, kind of locked herself in her room. but every now and then she'd walk up to her older sister and ask, "Has he left yet?" Now, I was a very curious kid and I had no clue what was going on. So my older sister was very distraught and very snappy towards me. Understandable, considering I was constantly following her and asking questions. I remember looking out my mom's window whilst my sister tried to push my head out of sight. This is also relevant. C yelled at her that he had to come all this way. He lived about an hour away, and something about the police, though I can't remember what. He left shortly after. Years later, I thought of this evening and finally asked my mom about it. What she told me left me shocked. Apparently, my sister found videos of children doing things they shouldn't be doing on his phone. It still gives me shivers thinking about how nice he was to me and why my sister tried to keep me out of view that night. This isn't as scary as most stories here, but I thought I'd share this and let you guys decide. But see, I really hope me and my family never see you again. This all happened a few months ago. Me and my 4 friends, we were all 13, were sleeping over at my friend's house on a Saturday night. We all got to his house around 4. Eventually, we decided to go to McDonald's. That was about 30 minutes from his house. After arriving at McDonald's, we ate our food, went to the shop for about 15 minutes, and left. It was around 5:30 when we decided to go to the welfare that was near the shop. Now, in the UK, anyone who lives here will know that it gets pitch black like at 5:30 in the winter, so it was dark outside. To get to the welfare, it was either a 20-minute walk around the housing estate we were by, or cut through a forest, which would take around 10 to 15 minutes. We all decided to cut through the forest. We were all joking around, pushing each other and trying to scare each other. Around 5 minutes before we got to the welfare, we all heard a twig snap to the left of us. We started laughing at my friend, letting out a slight scream. We thought it was a small rodent like a squirrel or something. We were about to keep walking when we saw our friend just frozen staring into the woods. We all told him to hurry the fuck up, but he just didn't move. 2 of us decided to go towards my friend to see what he was staring at. Looking back now, I really wish we would have walked around the housing estate, because what I saw will never, ever leave me, and I hope no one will ever have to experience this. I saw a man. He stood there staring at us, not moving. My friend took out his phone and turned on the torch and aimed it at him, but what I saw was just terrifying. The man has a knife clenched in his teeth, with the knife going through the side of his cheek, blood dripping down his chin and onto his clothing and floor. We all lost our shit screaming and running, trying not to trip on the mud or bottles on the floor. When we reached the end of the forest, we all had red faces and shaking. We all walked back to our friend's house, just reflecting on what just fucking happened. We went to have our sleepover and had a good time, except for the fact that we all kept thinking of what happened. We never told anyone about this, and I hope that I never meet that man in the woods again. Edit. It's been mentioned in the comments that we should have called the police. Yes, we should have. But we thought that our parents wouldn't believe us, as they would think it was a joke. However, if this happens to you, then be smart and call the police. Hi, so this is my first and last time I go dancing with people, and this story is of how I met up with a guy who was trying to get me to stay with him. So a long while ago, I had a group of friends that were really close. We would make fun of one another, go on hikes, and just be super chill. One girl in this group named T, keeping it there, got messed with a lot because she was newer and she had dated one of the guys in our group. She was really helpful to me and supported me in getting my whole life together. She really wanted me to do better for myself, and I still talk with her till this day. She talked to me about going dancing since I had been in a bad relationship with a Chad. Yeah, I know, I see your judgmental eyes. And he was treating me like shit, so going dancing was a good option. I'd never gone dancing, so I had no idea what to wear or how to dress. I wore a short black dress with some heels and realized once we got there I was way overdressed. We were celebrating my 21st birthday since I had a bad birthday since I was 10 and never really had a good birthday on my actual birthday. She wanted to take me out for some fun and we walked into this college country bar. We grabbed drinks and take some shots and then run to the dance floor. We're chilling out, talking and dancing with people when I notice I'm being stared at by a really tall guy. He is looking at me like I'm meat and licking his lips as he's sitting at one of the booths as I'm there with my friend T on the dance floor. I tell her about it and she says, "He probably just thinks you're pretty, but you just stay away from him when we leave just in case." We keep dancing and then I keep getting stared down and I feel the eyes deepen on me. I keep telling my friend and we start to dart away into the crowd, more as to not be seen. The night ends at 2 a.m. and we're walking back to our car. We did not drink and drive. We had a friend up the road at a D&D tournament who was sober to drive us all home. They live near the bar, but the boyfriend lives with T and her roommates. He's super cool and he sees us as bros, so he agreed to drive us home. We start to walk out when I notice the tall guy walking behind me and starts staring me up and down. I hold on to my friend and give her hints. She holds on to me and he walks ahead of us. You would think that would be it, but no. We're outside and due to the crowd we got separated. I look around and notice the tall guy is right in front of me. He starts to talk and that's when I notice he has a kind of Liberian accent. One of my coworkers is from Liberian. She is super sweet and the accent and dialect are very similar to how she talks. Him. Are you alone tonight? Me. No, I'm with a friend. I'm just looking for her. Him. What if she never finds you? Me. What? Like this dude never even asked my name and just starts talking, being hella creepy. He then doesn't let me finish talking and locks his fingers with mine. I get visibly uncomfortable and try to get away. He then goes and grabs my waist and pulls me in. He then says, "I'm taking you home tonight, and no one will find you." And I'm dead-ass freaking out, and struggle to get out of his embrace. I scream for him to let me go. People start to notice, and my friend T looks over and sees this going on. She runs to us and helps me get the hell out of his arms. She holds on to me and we start running to the car in panic. I legit turn to see this man smiling and waving at me as we're running. He says, "See you next time," with the creepiest fucking wave of my life. We get in the car and I tell my friend what happened and we go get my friend at the D&D tournament to take us home. As we're on the car on the way home, I tell him the story and explain the whole creepy situation. He tells me I should have called the cops or run to the bartenders for help. It's been 2 years since that incident, but I have never gone back since. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't run away. I'm sorry if there's any formatting issues or grammatical errors. I'm writing this on my phone and I've been wanting to tell this story for a while and felt like this would work here. This took place about 4 years ago when I was still in college. So, for preference, I'll be saying I didn't always make the smartest choices, but I've learned better now. I would not recommend anyone doing what I did. Around the time, I was doing acting jobs on the side for fun and was part of a Facebook group that covered the whole state. This was my main source to find any auditions before I had found an agent. One night I was scrolling the page and I saw there was an audition for this action film. I had never heard of the production company, but that was pretty common as many college students would use the page with a made-up production company name. Me, being a person who couldn't resist auditions for everything at the time, sent the director a message with my headshots. It took about 30 minutes for him to respond. I would like to note that it was 1 in the morning. When I had sent the message, I, being naive, thought this was normal. He asked if he can call me and I gave him my number. Blank minutes later, he called and introduced himself as Eric. He explained the plot and told me the role I'd play, which completely threw off my guard, because at the time I hadn't done many notable things for someone to just give me a role. I wish I had seen the red flags, but instead I let it get much worse. During this time, I learned that Eric taught classes on a military base nearby, and this film was loosely based on his 30 years in that field. I thought that was cool and realized that it wasn't some college project. Then, the conversation took a turn as he started to focus on my headshots I'd sent. He kept saying that I was so pretty and that I'd fit in well in his other business. He kept that focus there even when I asked more about the part. When I asked what the business was, he refused to elaborate, saying that I'd need to fill out some paperwork first as people had tried to ruin him in the past. I was apparently blind to the red flags that were directly in front of my face and signed all the paperwork because I was too nosy. Looking back, those documents probably weren't even legal. I sent them back to him, and he had said that I would hear from one of his partners, Karen. He also set up a time to meet later that day around 7 p.m. and had me write down an address. I wasn't from the area, so I didn't know where it was and figured I'd just look it up later that day. 10 minutes later, I get a call from Karen. She sounded nice and spoke highly of Eric. I expected this since they worked together. She told me she was excited that I was going to join the project and asked if I wanted to know about their other business. I told her yes, and she started talking. So he had a production company that made film and another that made porn. She told me that I would be a great fit and would love to have me on the team. I flat out rejected her offer. She tried to make me budge by telling me that their company was really popular, but I wanted no part in it. A few days later, this all happened. I tried looking up the company, but it didn't exist. She kept trying to get my opinion on really disgusting things that I won't mention because it gave me nightmares for the longest time. I could tell Karen was getting pretty frustrated that I wasn't going to break. She soon ended the call by going on about how excited she was that I was going to be in the one film. Most people would have cut ties with this by now. My curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself driving to the location Eric had made me write down. I knew it was a bad idea, but I just wanted to know. I was getting pretty dark by the time I was close, and I wasn't familiar with the area at all. When I finally arrived, I saw this rundown church with a single white truck in the parking lot. Finally, I talked myself out of the situation and turned around. I paused in the street next to the parking lot and quickly texted Eric. I told him that I did not feel comfortable and would not be taking part in this project. Right before I took off, I glanced at the church and saw a figure of a very large man standing in the dark in the lobby. I practically floored it at this point and went straight back to my dorm. When I got back, I had a new message for him saying, "I see you again. Don't be scared." I never heard from him again, but to this day I'm insanely paranoid that he'll find me. I still live in the same town, but have moved a lot since then. Occasionally I'll get a friend request from people who have his production company in their job description, but I quickly block them. I don't know what would have happened if I had gone into the building that night, or if I had played into Karen's hands, but I'm happy to be here and that's what really matters. So Eric, let's never meet again. For context, I'm a girl, and the major part of this story happened when I was in the 8th grade. I lived in the same house from the ages of 4 until I turned 21. It was a duplex, meaning there were 2 houses on the same property, with a large backyard. Our property manager had turned part of its garage into a small bedroom and had rented it out to a man. My family moved into the home closest to the backyard when I was 4. My dad, being the friendly guy he is, made friends with the man living in the small bedroom across from our home. This man was older, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, always reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, wore glasses and had crooked teeth, the works. Over the years, he watched me closely, in a creepy way. He'd only leave the door cracked open about an inch, and I'd see the glass gleam as he watched me play with my friends or by myself. He would always try to tempt me to come with him with money or candy. As I got older, I started inviting my middle school friends to my home. A few of them would comment on the weird man staring at us. I remember a time where I said, "He's staring at us again," and one of my guy friends responded with, "He's not staring at us, he's watching you." My best friend, and yes, she's the same best friend I've mentioned in the last 2 stories, we'll call her Karen. Karen and I had been super invested into Naruto. We'd always watch it on our spare time together. One of the characters, Jiraiya, was a super pervert who would lurk around women. Naruto called him Pervy Sage, so we started calling the creepy old man Pervy Sage as well. Sorry, Jiraiya. Late one night, maybe around 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., when I was around 13 or 14, Karen and I were in my dining room area, sitting at the computer with my dog on my lap. My parents were at work. My older brothers were in their room. They shared the master bedroom. They were hanging out with their friends. I recall hearing my front door open, but not thinking much of it. That's until I smelled the stench of cigarettes and alcohol. We looked to our left and saw him inside my home, but neither of us said a thing. Karen and I were both in shock. He walked up to us and stood behind me. He began to play with my hair, asking what we were doing. Karen and I just sat there, not knowing what to say. He knew my parents weren't home. She blurted out that we had ordered pizza online and typed in Pizza Hut on the search bar. She later told me if we ordered pizza, a grown-up would come and we could tell him or her what was wrong. The man did not budge. He continued to play with my hair. Karen got up and nervously said, "I'm gonna ask your brothers if they want anything on their pizza." And with that, she ran to the right, straight down the hallway, and bolted through my brother's door. I had just finalized the pizza purchase and heard her scream, "Pervy Sage is acting weird." The man spoke only Spanish. I doubt he knew what she said, but with that, I grabbed my dog and ran towards my brother's room and repeated it, "Pervy Sage is acting weird." Both Karen and I blurted out how weird he was being and how he came in uninvited. I can imagine we both looked hysterical. My brothers told us to get the fuck out of their room. I'm not sure if they were trying to act cool in front of their friends, but I knew how they were. If I didn't do as they acted, I'd get beat up or told off. Karen and I looked at each other, sort of defeated. We closed the bedroom door and stood right in front of it for a second. We looked back where we originally sat, but the man was not there. Karen and I ran to the kitchen, grabbing 2 knives, and ran into my bedroom and locked the door. She sat on the bed with my dog, and I sat on the floor, trying to listen or feel if he was walking around the house. My house was old, it would have easily shaken when someone walked around. So, I felt if I sat on the floor, I'd feel if you were inside. My bedroom had 2 doors, one with a lock that connected to the hallway, the other with no lock, connected to my parents' room, which was right next to the front door of the house. Karen and I heard his footsteps in the living room once more, then silence. We both looked at each other in horror. We both rushed to the second door and pushed against it just in time to stop him from opening it. The man pushed for about 30 seconds before stopping. The moment he stopped, Kira and I took the opportunity to push a dresser in front of the door to barricade it. About 15 minutes later of us sitting on my bed, knives in hand, we heard the pizza guy arrive. With that, the man was gone, back in his hole of a bedroom, outside my home. We locked the front door and ate our pizza. We didn't call the police because where we lived, we thought we'd believe two kids. A few days later, Karen and I reported everything to our school counselor. She was an amazing, caring woman. She was always there for us no matter what we needed. So we trusted her enough to tell her what had happened. She made a full report and interviewed us both separately to make sure we weren't lying. She called us both into her office the next day and let us know she had called the police to report the incident, but they told her, "We cannot do anything until something happens." Karen was furious. Are we supposed to be found dead in a ditch for them to do anything? I can still hear her saying this to this very day. Our counselor called our parents to report the incident. Karen's parents didn't seem to care. Their divorce was more important. My dad asked me if it was true and said he talked to the guy. My brother came to me saying, "If he comes near you, tell us." And all of a sudden they cared. My dad remained friends with the man. This man stopped talking to me for years, but never stopped watching. When I was 16, Karen and I were hanging out near the front of our property. The man had ridden his bike near us and said, "Your attitude has changed," in Spanish. This was the first time he said anything to me since the event 2 to 3 years prior. So I told him, "I'm not a kid anymore. I know what you are, and I can fight back." Karen glared at him. He moved away shortly after that. Karen and I lost touch after he moved away. We both went to different high schools, and for the first time in 2 years, we tried our hardest to remain in contact, but we grew apart. That and her mom had her moving from place to place after the divorce. I grew up with trust issues around men due to that man. It's just something I'm slowly trying to get over. I'm 24 now. The last time I saw him, I was in my dad's car, and he was riding his bike down the street. But that was back when I was 18. I haven't seen him since. I'm not quite sure how to even start this story. A lot of things I've experienced never really fit into the subreddit's guidelines until yesterday, when the story wormed its way into my head again. This story happened when I started a new school in the middle of the 6th grade. I'm 19 now. This was technically my first middle school, and for many, many reasons I transferred out. This definitely didn't help. About halfway through, I switched into Spanish to finish out the year. I had almost always had a foreign language class, so I thought it'd be a pretty easy grade to end with. There was a lot of buzz surrounding the Spanish teacher, Mr. D, and when I first saw him and how he acted, I thought I could tell why. He was a pretty eccentric guy if you only heard his voice and weren't looking at his stern face. You'd think he was pretty jovial. He almost always pronounced our names wrong, and he had this gigantic windmill on wheels in the corner of his room. The windmill reminded me that I'd actually heard about this teacher from an older boy called Jay in my Sunday school class. Weird how things can change so much in a number of years. I remember telling him I was going to his school. My mom and I had run away in the middle of the 6th grade year, and I would start at my new school after Christmas break ended. It was nice to know I had at least a couple of people that I knew, so if I asked if he could go tell me about the school, or if he had any advice, Jay had told me that if I ever got Mr. D to transfer out immediately. It sounded a little bit dramatic, but as we got more acquainted with Mr. D, so too did he get more acquainted with us. One thing that always made us all uncomfortable was how he'd rub chapstick on his lips fairly aggressively for like a minute, which was definitely made worse when he'd start with one leg resting on something and his crotch leaning forward. Sure, it was pretty uncomfortable, but not the worst thing in the world, just a bit odd. Have you ever seen a woman with her boobs resting on a desk? Sometimes it's on purpose, and sometimes it's an accident, especially when you're short and sitting down. Mr. D started to do this, but with his dick. He'd stand close to a desk to look at their work, but his bulge would be laying on their desk. He wasn't desk dick height either, so he stretched a little to do it. But given how strange he already seemed to be, I brushed it off as him not being self-aware. I just felt bad for the first row. Flash forward, and all of his little idiosyncrasy seemed to be a little more prominent as the days marched on. I remember once he even answered his phone and carried the conversation on a bit before stepping out of class. I should note, he wasn't a great teacher. He wasn't even a good teacher. English obviously wasn't his first language, which was fine because he was sent there to teach Spanish. Unfortunately, he didn't speak Spanish either. He'd always use the school PC to pull up Spanish videos on YouTube for us, and would mindlessly stare at his personal laptop. Like I said, a pretty easy class. I just feel bad for the other students who didn't already know certain things when the test came. We walked in one day, and on my desk, the chair in front of mine, and the desk in front of mine, there was a semi-straight line of off-white liquid. It was mainly on my desk and thin across the chairs in the front desk. Mr. D came over, not quite fast enough as the kid behind me asked what it was. All we got was nothing, as he very quickly wiped it away with his hands and rubbed it on his pants. He couldn't say water because it wasn't clear. It really only looked like one thing, but there wasn't any way to definitely prove it was. I tucked my hand into my sleeves and did my best not to touch the desk. About a week after that, I came into my English class at the end of the day to hear one of the girls having a pretty loud argument with our English teacher. I walked in at the middle, but the girl Megan was extremely upset and asking why she couldn't go to the principal. Megan was a little bit of a hothead, sure, but she still was a really nice girl. I couldn't see her dramatizing a situation this much. I later found out what had happened from my best friend at the time, who was in Mr. D's class when it went down. Their class was ahead of us, so their test was scheduled for that day. After papers were passed out, Mr. D went back to zoning out on his laptop again. Megan needed to ask a question. She had her hand up for ages, and he never noticed, so she went over to where he was and freaked out on him. He was watching porn with the sound off on the laptop he had always brought with him and gave all of his attention to. So when I came in, Megan was being reprimanded for being pretty verbal with Mr. D. Our teacher was basically telling her she shouldn't have been upset with the teacher watching porn in class, and that it's his laptop, as if it nullifies anything. Looking back, it explains so much of his shitty behavior. The desk dick rest, the hardcore stares, the personal laptop all the time, and the definite cum on our desks. It wasn't the first time he'd done it, and wouldn't have been the last if he hadn't gotten suspended for the rest of the month. Mr. D disappeared when we had a sub finish out the rest of the year with us. I got the fuck out of that school. After everything that had happened, but still kept in touch with a couple of friends who went. They told me that Mr. D was back, but for a while was the gym teacher and co-soccer coach, and the next year taught English. I really want to say, it surprises me he was brought back, even without knowing anything about what he teaches, but it doesn't. In hindsight, that school was atrocious. I have so many memories of bad shit students and teachers alike did. Another teacher was only given a suspension for actively looking down girls' shirts and up the girls' skirts when they were bent over. It's just concerning to know Mr. D probably still works there. I've had a lot of worse shit happen to me, and I'd still suppress this memory for ages. So, teacher who came on my desk and definitely scarred some kids for life. Let's not meet. This started in September of 2018. I had just started college and didn't have any friends there. The only person I spoke to was my ex-boyfriend. He introduced me to this woman, Kat, who was 27. I was 16, but despite the age difference, we got along pretty well. Then my ex dropped out of college and I started to talk to Kat more. We became pretty good friends. I would stay at hers, we'd get high and watch TV. Pretty fun, right? Then it got weird. She wanted me to stay at hers 2 or more times a week, often ringing me every other day and even phoning me 13 times in the space of a few weeks, asking me to go over. She then moved out of my city and moved to Manchester to go to uni. She asked me to stay at hers just after my 17th birthday for 2 weeks. This was the longest I'd ever been without my family, but I went anyway. Most of it was good, except for a few times when I'd get kicked out so she could work. She was a sex worker, and when she'd leave me alone for over 12 hours to go to the parlor, she also gave me a necklace that said something about me being her daughter, so hence the adoption. About 2 weeks after I got back to my city, she called me again. She told me she had had a psychotic breakdown, that she could barely remember anything that happened over the 3 days, had to be retrained in hospital, and that she had tried to kill her best friend. She also made a point to say that she was okay until I left, basically trying to blame me for her breakdown. Any rational person would have cut shit off then and there, but I guess I'm too nice. I didn't tell my friends or my boyfriend what she had done. I just kept it to myself and carried on as if normal, until she said something to my boyfriend that changed everything. My boyfriend and I are talking about moving out of the city when we go to university, and he told Kat and his friends this at college. She then says, "You're stealing my blank name." This was the final straw. I told my boyfriend what she had done, and he was obviously waiting for me to stop associating with her. She then sent me a message asking me to meet her after college, making a point to say, "Just the 2 of us." This was obviously terrifying, and I blocked her on social media and her phone number. She then gets another 17-year-old on my boyfriend's college course to ask me why we have been bullying her, etc. It was incredibly pathetic, and I was left wondering who else she would include. After this, she left me a long string of messages saying that this was not to tell anyone anything she had told me, as I should respect her privacy. I left her on red. So Kat, let's not meet. So, to start off, I live in a village in the northeast of the UK. There are only 100 or so people living here, and hardly anyone knows its location. Me and my mom have lived here for around 5 to 6 years, and we do love it. There's woods behind our house, and out front there's a pen with 2 lovely horses that I go feed apples and carrots to. However, we have a family from hell next door. The problem with our neighbors started around a year ago, on the 2nd of January. I was downstairs just watching TV while my mom was cleaning out the fire. She went outside to empty out the ashtray, and I could hear her mumbling from outside. The next thing I knew, my mom came inside with the most confused expression ever. I asked her what she was up to, and she told me after she had emptied our ashtray, our neighbors burst outside into our yard and screamed at my mom over the fence, saying nonsense like, "Oh, so Ellie can't park anywhere around here anymore, huh? How disgusting." I was confused, so I asked her what she meant. Basically, my mom had messaged our other neighbors wishing them a happy new year, and all that stuff as they were at their other house and couldn't tell them in person. But while she was texting them, she saw a car parked around the back of their house. She asked them if it was anyone to do with them. Now, she didn't really care about the car. She was just curious because that they were usually parked there with their car. It turns out it was my evil neighbor's son's girlfriend's car. Now, this is where things get out of control. My 2 neighbors text each other about my mom's question, and for some odd fucking reason, they see it as a threat. Yeah, ridiculous, isn't it? Me and my mom just shrugged it off because, to be perfectly honest, we couldn't care less about it. A few hours go by and my mom went out back again so we can empty the bin. Once again, my neighbor comes out storming, but this time she starts threatening my mom, saying things like, "I'll fucking kill you," and "I'll run over your dogs, you fat bitch." I was in the kitchen, so I heard everything, and I was shocked. What was wrong with her? My mom had had enough and came back inside and called her boyfriend and the police. The police came and my crazy bitch of a neighbor admitted everything we told him was true and that she was threatening to hurt us. But like typical British police, they said there was nothing they could do and told my mom to keep a journal and write down anything she does before he left. There were a couple of incidences where she would record my mom and her boyfriend in the garden and complain about our fire pit, but the next big incident was soon to come. My mom dropped me off into the town that was around half-hour drive away so I can go shopping with my mates, and drove back home. She decided to park around the back of our house because she needed to empty out the boot and put things into the garage, and decided to leave it there because it was our parking space. A couple hours go by and I asked my mom to come pick me up because I had finished shopping with most of my friends. I'd gone home to expect one of my friends whose train was still going to arrive in half an hour. My mom goes out to the back and sees that our neighbor has blocked her in, so she goes up to her door and asks if she can quickly move their car. No answer. So she knocks again. No answer. She was clearly in because she didn't go anywhere without her car. So after 5 minutes, my mom got fed up and called the police and asked them to help move her car. When the police arrived, she came outside. When they asked her to move the car, her answer was no. They kept asking her to move her car, and her reply was no for over half an hour, making my mom late to pick me up. My mom was furious and pleaded to let her get in her car to pick me up because I've been diagnosed with severe anxiety and I can't be left alone. My mom phoned me while the police were talking to our neighbor and explained what was happening. Thankfully, I wasn't alone because my friend was still there with me. Even he had missed his train and was phoning his parents explaining the situation to them. In the end, my mom got a ride in the stepdad's car to come pick me up. We also offered my friend a ride home. She moved her car while they were picking me up. I could write 1,000 things that these people have done, like how they filmed me, a 14-year-old trans guy, sunbathing in my garden because they thought my Switch I was watching videos on was an iPad, or when one morning they opened our back gate open so that when we let our dogs do their morning business, they nearly ran into a busy road, or even when she came into our yard and nearly knocked down our door because our dogs were barking back at her dogs. But this post has already gone long enough. I haven't even gotten to the recent story. The most recent incident happened the start of this year. For starters, in December of 2019, my dog Pippin died. It was her time to go, sadly, but we decided to stop her suffering and put her to sleep. So this was already a hard time for me and my mom, because I've given her at an age of 2. I'm now 15. But one day, while I was in my bed, my mom was downstairs cuddling with my 1-year-old puppy when she noticed something was wrong. He just couldn't lie down. He had a bit of foam coming from around his mouth and he was shivering like crazy. He then started to vomit violently and threw up this weird substance that looked like chicken, but it was coated in something red, and no, it wasn't blood. My mom was positive it wasn't. She immediately took him to the vet because we just lost my 13-year-old dog. There was no way we can lose my 1-year-old puppy, only a couple of days after we lost Pippin. Thankfully, after a lot of injections and vet visits, he was back to normal. Now, we didn't give him any treats that would make him sick. Just fed him his normal dog food, and my other dog was completely fine. He also couldn't have gotten something off the floor because we had just finished tidying up the house. What we think happened to him was when we put him out to do his business, that fucking psychopath of a woman threw something over our fence, knowing he'd eat it. What makes it worse is that she was a fucking vet, so she knew exactly what is toxic to dogs. Luckily, we're moving away from this crazy bitch this week, and her husband are now in trouble with the law, because they nearly beat a man to death when they were drunk, which now means the police are starting to believe us. So, my batshit crazy neighbor who films minors sunbathing and poisons dogs, let's not meet. Unless it's you behind bars, then I'd love to meet you again. This happened to me like 3 or 4 years ago.
Sorry for any mistakes. English is not my first language. First of all, I am introvert, just shy. My only romantic relationship was fast. This was my potential second serious relationship. I was 22 years old. I lived in a big city back then. I was a single forever mindset back then, but not really familiar with meeting apps. I had always talked online, but never did any IRL meeting because I'm a coward. Paranoid everybody's coming to get me. Well, guess I was feeling really lonely and just installed a dating app. At some point, a guy, 28, handsome in the eyes and full of charm, wants to meet me, a 22-year-old nerd, and to be honest, I made a full move because he wants to meet at my place, and I've accepted it. I was stupidly thinking, hey, he wants to meet me at my place, so he's not meaning any harm initially. Don't be like me, kids. Use your brain. Yeah, no, he means no harm, but he was weird as fuck. First, I insist to meet him when the sun was still up. After many texts where he was trying to change my mind, he complies and meets me at my apartment hall. I was charmed. He was tall, a little buff, soft eyes, and knows how to talk. For you to picture the scene, I was, and still am, nerdy type with glasses, skinny. Told him that we had to use the stairs because it's been a month since the elevator was out of service. Tried to smile even if I was nervous. I felt I was too. But here's where things get weird. When we were using the stairs, sun was up high in the sky, but he suddenly says he was drunk, and he was back from a party with his friend. He started to trip on his own foot while going upstairs. Okay, wow, weird. Maybe he was just nervous, so I stop in the middle, turn around, and ask genuinely where his friend was and if he wants to go back. I will not force him in any ways or wait for his answer. He assures me that he's okay and just a little drunk. There's no smell of alcohol, but his eyes were in focus and it alarmed me. He was playing being drunk or high? Then it begins to scare me for real. I insisted, okay, you're not right in your mind. Come with me and I'll call a taxi if you need it. Sorry to have to make you move when you were obviously sick. And began to go down the step and expect him to follow because, heck, at least have some common sense and don't go to a stranger's place when you know you're sick or high or whatever. He suddenly grabs my arm and squeezes it. I'd almost fallen down because I was not prepared. We were in the middle of the stairs and it was dangerous for both of us. Said it to him and insisted smoothly just to cancel for today. His eyes were focused now and he says, "No, I'm alright. Where do you live?" Maybe because of shock I answer, "I was living on the last floor." He stands straight and his hand's still on me. He began to go upstairs and I don't know why I haven't reacted, but I was following him. Like, dude, what the fuck? It's dangerous if we stay in the stairs. That was his last words before we silently reached the floor. In the doorway, he let my arm go. We discussed a little because I was really concerned about what had just happened. He said smartly, when I look back and just think that I was dumb, he wants to rest a little bit and needs water. As a simple-minded person who cares about the other's well-being, I began to hurry to open the door and invite him in. Oh, dude, I was so stupid back then. I was living like every student, in a worn-out small apartment, saving money to spend it on video games instead of actual food. Forced to drink water on the end of the month while cycling and watching food porn on YouTube because I think it was worth it. He made unusual comments like, "Oh wow, it's cozy here." I had no decorations because my life depends on my laptop and Wi-Fi. So yeah, I'm not really a warm place to be. Then he starts to call me with other names while talking. Had said nothing but, "Hey, it hurts, you know. At least remember my name." But I was still on the episode in the stairs and tried to ask him if it was a good idea for him to stay here when he obviously isn't well. Not that I don't want him to stay, but dude, you need to care for yourself. I was about to grab my phone and call an ambulance when I saw he was pale suddenly, but again he grabs my wrist and with force. Remember, me, nerdy type who works out by swinging their legs under a table. Him, buff and alpha type, full of force. I have survival instinct, and I'm not fool enough to argue against him when he scares the heck out of me. Side note, I may develop it with humor, but it was really a little traumatic experience for me. Never ever will I meet someone IRL again. First and last experience. It's not the end of the story, so again, his eyes were perfectly focused after being blurry all this time. I just didn't understand anything anymore. I wanted to scream for him, but nothing came out. He says he don't need that. He knows perfectly how to go back and invites me to sit in my own house. And again, like a puppet, have to play it cool and don't show my fear. At this time, even if the story was years ago, I remember it with every detail. So at this time, my only thought was, give him whatever the fuck he wants and kick him out. Problem is, it's my own house. I invited him. I'm fucked. Then my marvelous brain suggests me to play it like a mad nerd. Desperate me obeys and starts to say incoherent things for him to think I'd lost my mind and decide to go out. Well, I think I effectively scare him because he says, I have to go to the bathroom. Insert shocked Pikachu meme here. While he was in the bathroom, I heard him running the water. Not thinking twice, I grabbed my phone and text the first friend on my list, but being stupid as fuck, I just say, hey, what's up? What are you doing? I was panicking. A stranger I invited was in my house. If I call the police, what can I say? Hello, I invited a psycho, please help me. No time to think anymore. He gets out of the bathroom and looks at me, afraid, and he asks, have you changed your hair color? Well, why are they red? I'm Asian. Typically Asian looking, big glasses on a round face, dark hair. The only color set on my face is when I'm cold because there's no heat, and it's winter when I lived back then. The most longest minutes of my life passed because I can't understand what the shit he's saying. And he says, show me how to open your door please, baby. Okay, maybe he was trying to flirt or whatever, but I was so confused I literally show him how to open my apartment's door with mechanic gestures. After long, minutes fly away, then finally grabs the door handle. I was so happy, just yay, man, finally, please get out of here, please, please, please. He was just copying my gesture twice. Open, close, open, close. I don't remember whose phone it was that rang, but it snapped both of us out of this weird time lapse, and he finally decided he had to have to go. Thanks every hero in this galaxy, I'm free. After that, I was cleaning up every place he went. Opened the windows and showered myself because I don't even want to smell him on me. I have a sensitive sense of smell. I missed 1 week pretending I was sick and have no more motivation. Told my friends about it years after. 1 year later, I was moving with my best friend to share an apartment. Happy ending, bruh. So, I have a regular run-in with creeps, as you can tell from my last post about the high school weirdo. This happened more recently. I was 20, and I took my sister who was 16 to Starbucks in our area. We were sitting outside the cafe, and I noticed this guy who was a young Asian male, and wore a fedora, staring at us from inside. He didn't have coffee. He wasn't doing anything, just staring. My sister went back inside to go to the bathroom, and he promptly came out. He started talking to me, and he was weirdly very intelligent, and spoke like he was from the early 1900s. He told me his name was Clyde, and he jokingly asked if I could be his Bonnie. I was really creeped out by that, and my sister came out and he left back inside, but continued to stare. One day at my job, I was getting coffee in the mall. I work at in a Starbucks inside a Macy's, and of course, he was there. This location and the last location are about 5 miles apart, so I have no idea why this dude was here. Same thing, doing nothing, just staring. I went to my job and I would see him walk back and forth frequently, and I was so creeped out that he knew where I worked. One day when I was off, I I got a text from my manager saying a young Asian man was looking for me, and that she already knew him as a creep because he had frequently followed her as well. I told her he was doing the same thing to me. You would probably think I'm lying at this point, but I go to the third Starbucks legit 15 miles from where I live, and he's there. I don't know if this dude is just really interested in Starbucks or what. He doesn't talk to me, but I go home, go to bed, and when I get ready to go to work, I see that someone wrote in my car with their finger, because my car is dirty and it said, "I'm in love with you." I honestly thought it was my boyfriend, and I called him telling that he was cute, and he was super concerned because it turns out it wasn't him. My first instinct is that it was this dude, Clyde. I since have moved jobs, but still in the area, and of course, our paths have met for the third time when I was just walking. He's sitting at the bar thing by a window of a food place, I don't know what it was, and he waved and blew me a kiss. I told my new job just in case he had happened to show up, and lo and behold, my manager dropped her jaw and said that the girl before me was being stalked by him as well. I honestly don't know how many girls he has done this to, and how he has the time to follow these girls, but he honestly radiates creepiness. I haven't seen him since, thank God, but every time I go to Starbucks, I scope the whole place out before I go in, to make sure he never sees me. To Clyde, I won't be your Bonnie, and I hope we never meet again. Hey, I'm on the phone, so sorry about the formatting. This isn't too climactic, but it did open my eyes to what people are capable of doing. So one day about 2 years ago, I was at my house with my younger sister and our friend. We were about 20 to 21 years old, all females. We were hungry and decided to go out and get some sushi. On the way to the restaurant, I noticed that I was low on gas, so I stopped to get some. I pulled up to the pump and parked the car. I went into the gas station to pay while my sister and our friend was waiting in the car. I was walking across the parking lot into the store. I noticed a man staring at me with a creepy smirk on his face. We made eye contact and yelled across the parking lot, "Hey, beautiful, why aren't you smiling?" I didn't respond or even acknowledge him. However, a young woman who witnessed this said to me, "Do not tell her to smile. She doesn't have to do anything for you." To this day, I think about that woman. I thanked her and continued walking to the store. As I stood patiently in line, the same man walked in. He came right over to me in line and started to touch me. He was rubbing my arms and lower back, and I pulled away. I said loudly, "Get away from me. I don't know you. Don't touch me or I'll defend myself." Other customers and the cashier were watching us. I caused a scene. He whispered in my ear and told me to shut up so people don't think he's a creep. Suddenly, a man ran out of the store and to my car with my sister and friend still inside of it. I ran after him. He opened the car door and started to say something to them when I yanked him back so hard from his shirt collar and punched him in the face. He proceeded to call me a bitch and every other name in the book, but he left us alone and got in his car and drove away. I'm much more aware of my surroundings now. To the creep gas station man, let's not meet. I was driving a rental car at 3 a.m. Just my friend Theo, name changed, and I heading home at the end of a busy road trip. We were on a twisting 2-lane road, and the kind with no streetlights, the kind that weaves through the mountains. We wanted to make it back before dawn, but a few hours from home, exhaustion hit us. Blurry-eyed and desperately trying to stay awake, we looked ahead for some place we could stop, anywhere with lights. There was almost no signal on our phones for search options, so we were relieved to finally see a distant gas station through the trees up ahead. It had been the only building and lights we had seen for miles. As I drove towards it, I saw a blare and realized I had just passed someone. A man walking a few paces off to the side beside the road, just at the edge of the woods. My brief glimpse had shown him in dark clothes, something long resting on his shoulder. Huh, Theo said. I made some sound of acknowledgement. We'd both seen it. Weird, but we weren't concerned as we were too exhausted to care. Then we were both very frustrated that the gas station turned out to be a small medical clinic, long ago converted from a gas station. They had kept the typical awning above where the gas pumps would be. The lights were on outside, but the office was dark. We eased down the narrow gravel drive and paused in front of the building anyways, trying to get enough signal on our phones to look for a hotel, or somewhere safe to nap. Signal was still spotty, so we were resorting to paper maps. Neither one of us felt great about the spot, even if it was a little island in the light of the dark area. This is when the man showed up in the rearview mirror, continued walking along, keeping at the edge of the pool of light. I had an immediate bad feeling and started the engine. No lights, just engine. Didn't want to blind some poor guy just trying to get somewhere if that's all he was. He passed us by. I saw his back and realized he was carrying a flag on his shoulder, wrapped with cord. I couldn't quite make out the flag type. It looked like it might be a US flag, but it didn't look quite right. The bars were too thick and not quite enough, and I couldn't see if there were stars there at all. Hard to tell in the dark. And with the flag curled up, his clothes looked odd too, like some strange combination of a military surplus store, but I'd seen odd clothing on drifters before. He just passed on, kept walking into the dark, out of the light, out of sight. I told myself that he was just a local walking home from some hole-in-the-wall bar or homeless man heading to the next town. I told myself the exhaustion was getting to me, making me paranoid. We looked at the map for some time, cursing our bad signals, and finally we had figured out a route to what looked like the nearest large town to get either a hotel room or just a safe parking lot to nap in. We got ready to go. I told Theo he could put the seat back to nap. I had a second wind. We would make it. Theo sighed in relief and put his seat back. I was pretty sure he fell asleep in seconds. I tried my phone again, watching the signal flicker in and out, and then sighed and checked the paper map once more. Ready to go, I turned on the high beams to check out the narrow road that led us out of the lot, and my adrenaline shot up. Best energy drink I could have had. The man hadn't walked on. He stood there in the dark, and now my brights lit him up, facing us now. Dark clothes, dark military-style boots, dark complexion, and a huge smile. That smile raised the hairs in the back of my neck. It seemed all sort of off to me. He was staring at the car, just grinning, and he was blocking the little road to the front of us. I waited. If this guy wanted to mess with me, he'd have to come closer. He had waited a good distance away. I would wait for him to make his move. I checked behind me, gauging if I could quickly back up, but it had been a weird turn into the place, a gravel road, plus several concrete poles to move between. It would not have been a speedy path in reverse. I don't know this car well, and I'm not confident I could reverse without getting into an accident. I glanced at my sleeping friend, then the guy was suddenly in front of our car. I'm still not sure how he could have done that, in what must have been only a few seconds while I was looking away. I can only blame it on exhaustion how he was suddenly there, light shining on his white teeth and a huge weird grin. I must have made a noise because my friend woke up and sat up. "The fuck?" he managed. And the guy just stared at us, just grinning at us in the headlights standing right in front of my car. Just grinning. "Some crazy guy," I murmured. We had both lived in a big city. We dealt with typical crazies before. If they weren't armed, usually there was nothing to worry about. I saw no weapon. I was wary, but not scared. Then I noticed a heavy-looking point at the end of the flagpole, still resting against his shoulder, and the mental image of him spearing into my windshield, or just down into the hood of my car, was suddenly vivid. I had no idea what was going on, but I did not want to give this middle-of-the-night crazy a reason to attack the car. and I knew I couldn't quickly reverse to get us out of there. I waited, mentally willing the grinning nutcase to walk on with his weird flag and clothes. I have no idea how long he stood there, just staring at us and grinning. After what seemed to be a long moment, he began moving, but moving against the car and sliding to the side, slowly coming around to one slide, but dragging himself against the side of the car as he moved. The car shifted slightly with the weight, and I could hear the slide of cloth and the drag of the wooden flagpole on the side of the car. A small, ridiculous part of my brain congratulated me on buying the insurance for the rented car. Sure, he was scratching it. The grinning man gripped the driver's side mirror, as if using it for support, and leaned down. I saw a glimpse of that grin through my side window and looked away. I suddenly did not want to look at that freakish smile when it was only inches away from my face, just a little glass between us. Theo leaned over slightly, looking through the window. I saw my friend shake his head no, and he said firmly no. I saw the grinning man make a hand gesture, and Theo said louder, more ferociously, "No!" The man straightened, no longer leaning on the car. I saw his fist grip the pole, and I gunned it out of there. And he just stood there, the dark figure staying in the pool of the light as I shot out into the dark road. No longer sleepy at all, we had no problem staying awake to the next town, where we found a motel. Crazy flag-carrying man, let's not ever meet again.
Not many people are unlucky enough to have multiple experiences they can truthfully write about on this subreddit, and I thought I had my fair share of creepy experiences. Then, yesterday happened. So, for context, I have recently, within the last few months, moved to York. And after the first month there, I had decided to start taking the bus, because I had figured it would be cheaper than paying for gas all the time. This all happened when I was waiting at the bus stop after work. This guy, who I was assuming was homeless because of his disheveled appearance, was waiting for the bus as well. He asked me if I had any spare change, and I told him that I didn't. This seemed to make him angry for some reason. Multiple times I caught him glaring at me, and it was enough to put me on edge. But then the bus came, so I was relieved a little. I got on the bus, paid with my prepaid ticket, and took a seat in the very back seat. The bus was pretty crowded and noisy, so I put my headphones and started to listen to a podcast. Soon the creepy homeless guy was out of my head. The bus pulled into the transfer station, and I got on the 5W, sitting in the back like I always do. That's when I noticed that the homeless guy had also boarded the 5W. This sent some waves of anxiety through me, but I couldn't believe that he was following me, and I really thought it was just coincidence that he was taking the same bus as me again. So yet again, I tried really hard to keep him out of my mind, which eventually worked. I got off the bus and started walking home, my earbuds still in, listening to Adventure Zone. Amnesty, if anyone's wondering. I walked up to my house and opened the door. My pet, Lily, greeted me like she always does. I actually got Lily after what had happened to me and Katie. This is when things got creepy again. Lily started barking, which she never does, and she was staring out the window above my kitchen sink. It was the damn homeless asshole. It looked like he was fiddling with the window, trying to open it. I ran outside, Lily on a leash, barking at the man and tugging against the leash. I told him that he'd better fuck off, or I'd accidentally lose my grip on Lily's leash. He took the hint and left, and I haven't seen him since, not even at the bus stop. I've considered calling the police, but there's honestly not much to tell them. I probably will call them and report the homeless man, so hopefully he doesn't try this with anyone else. So this incident happened when I was 17 or 18. I was with my friend Anne. just hanging out at my house. It was spring or summer, so the temperature for being outside was nice. So I suggested we take a walk on the trail in my neighborhood, since Anne loves the outdoors. Big mistake. So my house is really close to the beginning of a walkway. We start strolling and talking about our lives, when we see this guy ahead of us with a fishing rod. He was probably in his 20s, 5'10", and had dark hair and glasses. He was walking towards us in the opposite direction, and we assume he had just tried fishing by the lake that was where we're headed to at the end of the trail. Right before he passes us, he looks down at the ground and starts mumbling about something, then looks at us awkwardly and says, "This is a good time for the worms to come out of the ground, since it's just rained and all." My friend and I look at each other with a sort of weird out look expression and said, "Yeah." We kept walking. We've made it 10 steps before we see the guy turn around and was now following us, going in the same direction he just came from. Now, of course, this freaked us both out. He had a very intense, socially awkward, creepy vibe to him. My gut was screaming that something was off, so naturally, in a state of panic, I called my dad. I started talking and make it sound like he works for the police. I know, not the most believable thing, but I was young and full of adrenaline. The guy is still strolling behind us, though he slowed his pace. I hang up with a very confused dad, wondering why I was having essentially a one-way conversation, and we get to the end of the trail. Now, let me set the scene here. There's a line of trees on either side of the walkway, with people's backyard on one side and the other side of the lake to the other. Once you emerge, there's an opening field with a hill, a canopy sort of picnic table setting, and a slope that takes you to a graveled area where you can sit close to the water. At this point, my friend did not want to stay very long. The guy headed down the slope to the water, where we saw another man in a dark-colored outfit. Anne and I walk up the hill and sit down, trying to get some distance between us. After about 5 minutes, she turns to me and says, "I'm really uncomfortable with them. They keep looking over at us." I'm pretty oblivious, so I had no idea. There was a construction worker on a crane right nearby, so I felt a little bit safer, but Anne didn't. So we stood up and started to walk the other way home, which is over the hill and onto the road lined with the houses, avoided going into the arid direction of the slope and trail. The guy sees this and starts walking up towards the hill. We see this and start power walking. They speed up as well. At this point, I'm freaking out, as is Anne, and we start running. They run after us, and after making it down the hill onto the road, we see the man outside the house on the driveway, about to get in his car. Sir, there's 2 men chasing us. One has glasses. If you see them, please stop them. Thank you," I managed to say with labored breath. He nodded and looked very concerned, looking around the bend as we took off running again. I have asthma, and I started to wheeze and slow down, and yelled that I didn't have time to stop and dragged me along. We quickly glanced back and didn't see them, but didn't want to take a chance, so we sprinted back to my house and got to the front door. It was locked, and my parents weren't home. I forgot the key, so we look at each other, terrified, and sit on the porch, as hidden as possible. After about 20 minutes, my mom gets home and we run inside the garage into the house. I didn't go walking on the trail for 2 years, and now I always bring a Mel with me. So to the 2 guys who chased me and my friend, let's not meet again. So this literally happened 30 minutes ago. I'm driving to work and it's about 3:30 a.m. I take 3 different routes to work, but I've been taking the same one for a while since there's construction everywhere else. I'm driving down the road, and on either side of the road it's all subdivisions. I'm listening to a podcast, trying to keep myself awake until I can get some coffee. I start getting this uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I thought it was my body telling me to get some caffeine and maybe something to eat. I ignore it and continue driving. All of a sudden, this guy starts running out in the middle of the road. I barely see him since he was wearing dark clothes. I managed to slow down and I noticed he looked pretty freaked out. Now, I listen to a lot of creepy podcasts ranging from true crime to supernatural. I know the rules to stay safe in situations. I wish I listened to them today. I normally wouldn't have stopped, but I knew that if something happened to me, I would want someone to stop. So I did. Luckily, I kept my car running and I rolled my window down a little bit just so I can talk to the guy. I asked him if he was okay and he started freaking out, saying that someone was trying to kill him. He told me his dog was ripped apart in front of his lawn, and he tried to pick the remains up to try and bury it, but he saw a man running after him with a knife. He said he thought it was probably a coyote or something, so he wasn't suspicious, but he ran off when he saw this man. Now, I was pretty freaked out, but I noticed something. Yeah, it was dark, but with the lights on inside my car and the lights that were on in front of the subdivision, I could see pretty well. He was younger, about mid-30s, dark black hair and green eyes. He was wearing a hunter's jacket and jeans. I live in Idaho, so hunter's jackets are pretty normal attire. What I noticed, however, there was no blood or fur anywhere on him. I asked him why there wasn't any blood on him, and his whole demeanor changed. It was like I was turning off the switch. My blood went cold. He stared at me for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a couple of seconds. What came out of his mouth next was the final straw for me. His whole body relaxed, he stopped shaking, and he leaned closer towards my window and smiled at me. It was a twisted type of smile, and his eyes went dark. He took a deep breath and said, "I was gonna help you," and then started cackling and tried to open my car door and immediately rolled up the window, put my car into drive and sped off down the road, not stopping for anyone. Once I finally got to work, I started crying. I still have 10 minutes before I have to go in, and honestly, I'm terrified to get out of my car. So the guy that wanted to help me, let's not meet ever again. In my first year of college, when I was 18 to 19, just a pup, I lived in the dormitories like many first years. The first week there, they had a big meeting, a welcome to res, with admin and housekeeping stuff. One of the campus security managers was there to talk about safety. One piece of advice he gave was, if you see anyone hanging out around that looks suspicious, the best thing to say is, "Can I help you?" Because it doesn't sound too confrontational, but you'll figure out pretty quick who isn't supposed to be there. This advice always stuck with me and came in handy one day. Fast forward a few months later to summertime. I've got a summer student job at the office, a big step up from the retail/food service jobs I've had as a teen. It wasn't a big skyscraper with 50 plus floors. The floor I was on was only accessible by key card. The bathrooms were located in the elevator lobby. There were a couple of other students that summer, and they put us all in the same area. One day, one of the other students left to go to the bathroom. When she returned to her desk, I then got up and walked out of the open area to the office, probably to go use the photocopier or something. A man I'd never seen before was standing there. He was holding a roll of paper in his hands and was looking around the office. His arm was sort of shaking like he had had too much caffeine, and he looked kind of scuffy. Looking back at it, he was probably on drugs. Remembering the security manager's advice, I said, "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said. "I need a lawyer, please." Now, the floor I was on had lawyers working there, but It wasn't the kind of lawyers that took clients from the public. They worked solely for the organization. I knew something wasn't right. "Who let you in?" I asked. "Oh, just some chick. Seemed nice." Something clicked. I knew he was talking about the other student, the one who had just come back from the bathroom. Not knowing what else to do, I told the man to come with me, and I went to one of the lawyers that was working that day. He explained the dude said he needed a lawyer. He was very mysterious and said that he didn't want to say much about why he was there, and kind of frowned at me. Like he was insulted that I asked why he was there. She wrote down a phone number for one of the legal aid officers for him, and walked him out of the office with me. He thanked her profusely and offered to shake her hand, and said, "Can I get your name?" The lawyer said no, and we shut the door on him. I thanked her for helping me, saying I didn't know what to do. She said no problem, and agreed the guy seemed weird. Then I went to the other student who'd left her desk earlier, and she said yes, there was a man standing in the hallway. He said hi to her very politely. She just said hi and shrugged it off and kept walking. She didn't realize it, but he had caught the door behind her before it closed and followed her in. She didn't see him. She definitely didn't let him in as well, she said. And then I called the building security number. Some guards came up to the floor, and I told them what happened and described the man's appearance. They told me sometimes people will try to break into offices to steal laptops or something. They then took statements from the lawyer and the other student. I asked how he could have known the floor I was on had lawyers. They said he probably didn't know, but that the building was full of them, so when caught, he said it to avoid suspicion. They sent another guard to check the rest of the building for him, but said he likely just took off because having someone stop him and be on to him probably freaked him out. They told me I did the absolute right thing by calling them. Thank you, campus security manager, for giving me some sound advice. Scruffy creep that tried to break into my office. Let's not meet. When I was in year 6 at primary school, our school decided we would have a residential trip to one of those adventure places where you go kayaking and do other similar activities. We were all assigned to our rooms of 8. One night, after I had done many activities, I came back to my room and had looked out the window where I could see a strange man in all black sat on the bench. Before going to sleep, I went to the bathroom and shut the window. In the middle of the night, many of us in the room woke up to the sound of a bathroom door creaking and saw a strange man come out. He stood there staring at us. I will never forget the feeling of his eyes staring into my soul. After what felt like hours, he disappeared back into the bathroom. At first, I thought this was just a nightmare, but in the morning, my roommates asked me if I saw it too, and when I said yes, I could tell it sent shivers down all of our spines. After that, I went to check if the bathroom window was open, and it was, so someone must have opened it in the night. Strange man in our room. Let's not meet. Context. Happened in a mall about 5 to 6 years ago. I was all alone during that time. Story. I just got out of the music school and stayed outside for a bit. I don't remember much of what I was doing back then, but I think I was just playing on my phone or texting, as I was just minding my own business. A man approached me and provoked me when he tapped on my shoulder. Keep in mind that I don't know who the guy is and I haven't seen him anywhere. By the clothes he wore, he seemed to be a barber from a nearby salon. At that time, I assumed he approached me only to ask for the time or directions. But no, he asked me about my name, age, and if I'm available. He was being suggestive at me. Nervous, I didn't reply. I just stared at him, not knowing what to do. Later on, I hesitated and went back inside the school and told my teacher. She then told me to stay inside for a while. After about 30 minutes, she let me go and I went straight home. I never spoke about it to my parents or siblings. A few weeks later, me and my dad went to the same mall to buy something. As I passed by the music school, I saw the guy. I was horrified as I had thought that he was scolded by the school after what happened last time. Fortunately, he didn't seem to remember me and I was relieved. So that's my story. Even though I'm now 18 and currently live far away from what happened, I still wishing that I would never meet this guy ever again. It's been a few days since this took place, and I'm still kind of creeped out. Nothing really happened, but it feels like a close call type of situation that could have gone very badly. This is my first and hopefully last time posting in the subreddit. I'm currently taking my first year of astronomy class in university for an easy credit. When we were discussing the planets, the professor mentioned that Jupiter and Saturn are highly visible in the south-west sky in the evening, so that the first star you see is actually Jupiter, which is pretty neat. I decided to go out that evening by the lake and, sure enough, was able to see Jupiter. Now the light pollution in the town is pretty bad, but down by the waterfront, the light is somewhat minimized. There is also no street lamps in the immediate vicinity, which makes stargazing decent. I began to go down by the waterfront at dusk, around 7 p.m., and staying a few hours to observe and learn the constellations using a stargazing app. I did this for almost 2 weeks straight, weather permitted. My professor also mentioned to the class that binoculars are better for stargazing than a telescope for beginners, so I bought a pair of binoculars online. A few nights ago, Monday, I'm writing this on a Friday, I decided to go much later, around 9:20 p.m., with my new binoculars for the first time. So, it was already dark out. I wanted to try and take some pictures of Jupiter with my phone looking through the binoculars. I usually cut across a tiny parking lot to get down to the waterfront. It should be noted that the parking lot is beside a small historical tower, which has a little hill behind it. As I'm able to cross the dark parking lot, no lamps or light sources, I hear a "Hey," and "Stop." I hear nothing else, and as the silence stretches on, start to get creeped out. I turn around and start to walk back home, but as I'm nearing the street, I think to myself, you know what? No. I want to test these binoculars out. I ignore my gut feeling. I'm a little neurotic, and my gut feeling are often an overreaction. But instead of crossing the parking lot, I decide to go around the tower and sit on the little hill behind it, because I don't know who is by the water and I don't want to risk it. The tower is close to the street, which means there's fewer street lamps nearby, but the tower blocks the light out enough. Huge mistake. As I'm fiddling with the binoculars and trying to take pictures, I notice two figures making their way up the hill in my direction. Now that in itself is not a big deal, but I started to get a weird feeling again. Just this really strong gut reaction that something isn't right, and that I need to leave now. Again, I brush it aside and tell myself I'm being paranoid and stupid, and to just focus on what I'm doing. They're probably just out for a stroll. It's a nice night. When I put the binoculars down again, I notice that they're closer, and still walking straight towards me. My eyes have adjusted to the dark by now, and I can see that they're two men. "Good evening," I say, trying to sound cheery and to ward off any worry, but I get no response. What's weird is that I know that they're within earshot, and a normal person would say hello back, right? One guy stops walking and looks out onto the street. The other guy keeps walking towards me and stops. Both of them are kind of backlit, so I can't see their features very well. One of them seems to have a beard. Both are wearing big black coats. "Hello," I ask very loudly. The guy with the beard is about 20 feet away from me, but I can't tell if he's looking at me or just in my general direction. I know that he's definitely within earshot at this point. He takes a few slow steps towards me and stops, 15 feet away. My mind is racing and I'm trying to remember any self-defense techniques I learned in high school gym class, but coming up empty. Hello? I ask again and again, get no verbal response. Instead, he takes a few more steps and pauses, 10 feet away. I just have alarm bells going off in my head at this point, and the feeling of "get out of here now" has completely gripped me. It suddenly dawns on me that there's nobody around. It's just me and these two men behind the tower in the dark. I need to leave in a way that won't make them react badly. I pull out my phone, trying to keep an eye on the guy, hoping that he can't see my screen as I'm shaking so much I'm struggling to open the phone app. I eventually manage to open it after what feels like an eternity and pretend to dial a number because this is a hand-me-down phone and I use it to take pictures and videos, aka no SIM card, aka I can't call for help. My actual phone is at home. "Hi, Mom," I say loudly and trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking at the stars." "Yeah, they're really pretty." As soon as I say those words, they instantly start walking away. Part of me wanted to try to get a picture of them, to possibly report them. I mean, what if this happened before? But my instinct to get me away from the area was stronger. Since the tower is in a circle, they could have easily just walked away from the tower to intercept me on the other side, so I didn't risk it. I didn't even try to pack up my binocular properly. I just grabbed my stuff, loudly saying things like, "Yep, I'm coming home," and pretending to be on the phone, only hanging up once I was in a brightly lit area and around other people. Nobody followed me, thankfully. Fundamentally, nothing really happened. The whole ordeal was probably 3 minutes long, from them walking up the hill to them leaving. But if you remove the emotions I felt, just looking at the events objectively, it's incredibly creepy how they never replied, despite being within earshot, and how quickly they booked it as soon as I pretended to call my mom. I have no idea what they had planned, but it couldn't have been good given their behavior. I realized afterwards that I never told anyone what I was doing, and nobody knew where I was or what time I was planning to get back. And given that I'm not great at replying to messages, and am a friendless recluse, and my housemates and I are in completely different programs at uni, no classes together, it's reasonable to assume that nobody would have noticed I was gone for another 12 plus hours. I don't want to know what they would have done if they'd called my bluff and realized nobody was on the other end of the phone. I'm pretty convinced that the shout from the parking lot is not connected to them, and we're just uni students being hooligans, and that I was indeed being paranoid the first time my instincts kicked in. I'm still a little shaken up, which is admittedly a little silly since it's already been a few days, and I should be over by now, because it's such a minor incident. I've had a few nightmares in which the situation has drastically different ending. I won't let this event scare me away from stargazing, but I'll make sure to bring something to defend myself with, and to tell my housemates where I am, what time I should be back, and when to check up on me the next time I go out. To the two silent creepy men behind the tower, if we ever meet again, watch out. Note: I checked Google to see if there were any reports on kidnapping/attempted kidnappings, assaults, or criminals that might have matched the description, but found nothing.
This happened not too long ago. It's kind of embarrassing to talk about, really, but it will probably come out in the news anyways, so I guess I should tell my side before the media makes a field day of it. I can see the headlines now. 26-year-old virgin gets abducted by the only girl he's ever talked to. Alright, they'll probably have more class than that, but anyone who can read between the lines will see it. I'm a bit of a weeaboo. There, I admitted it. I was at an anime con. And in cosplay. I went as All Might from My Hero Academia, if you need to know. It was right around the Death Note booth. I turned from a heated discussion about Elle when I bumped into her. She was amazing. Cute little ears and a perfectly painted nose. Her whiskers were so realistic, and that tail. I fell for her as soon as she said, "Excuse me, ow," and started to clean herself with her paws. I said sorry and then introduced myself. How I had the courage to speak at all is beyond me, but I did. She said something else and it was funny. We laughed. When I turned to walk away, she began to follow me. It was subtle at first, but I finally figured it out. Every time I turned back, she was staring at me. It should have creeped me out, yet it didn't. I had never had that kind of attention from anyone before, and it was flattering. She would give this cute little wave with her paws and meow or purr at me. So damn adorable. I finally said, "Come here, kitty," and she skipped up to me. We spent the day looking at mangas and talking about this lore and that. She said her name was Chi. I assumed she was using a fake name because that's a character from Chobits. It didn't matter though. She was cute and fun and playful and perfect, or so I thought. We stayed together until the convention closed down that day. Before we parted ways, I gave her my phone number and she gave me the silver bell she wore on her collar. I didn't know it at the time, but she was essentially giving me her calling card. I waited for weeks for a phone call from her, but I wasn't surprised when it never came. In fact, it was so long afterwards that we would meet again, I almost forgot about her. It was months later, when I was coming out of a grocery store, that I noticed something odd on my car's windshield wiper. It was a little silver bell. I looked around and couldn't find a trace of who had left it. I knew though, because I had an identical one at home. A few days later, I found another one in my mailbox, then one on my desk at work, and finally one on my bed at home. Yeah, I was freaked out. Someone had come into my parents' house all the way downstairs and left a silver bell on my pillow. I was turning it in my hands when there was a knock on the door. My mom yelled out that there was a package for me, so I went to go get it. She asked me who it was from, but there was no return address on it. I made something up and told her it was from one of my fan club groups. She quickly lost interest at that, which allowed me to take it downstairs and open it in peace. Inside the box, there were hundreds of silver bells just like the ones I had been finding. What made this different though was at the bottom, there was a dead mouse. It looked like it had had its throat cut. Truly disturbing stuff. I didn't know what to tell people. I figured they'd all laugh at me or make fun of me or not believe me at all. So I did what anyone would do. I buried the mouse and threw out all the bells I had gotten. I now realize I had just destroyed a lot of evidence. But understand, I was freaking out and not thinking clearly. The next day I began to receive phone calls. One at first, then a few days later, almost one every hour. No one would talk on the other end. It would be meowing or soft purrs for like 5 minutes straight, then they'd hang up. The number only showed up as private. I began to let them go to voicemail. It continued for about a week. On the last day, I had over 200 messages of things like this. Finally, they just stopped. A week after the last phone call, I received a letter. Again, it had no return address. Quickly, I took it downstairs before my mom even noticed I had gotten anything. In the privacy of my own room, with only my Spike Spiegel and Fist of the North Star posters to witness, I opened the letter. I screamed. Inside was a picture of a girl in a catsuit. Her face was hidden behind her 2 paws, but it was what was at the end of those paws that startled me. They had claws for sure. It's just that they looked like some kind of Freddy Krueger adaptation. Long knives extended from her fingers covered in fur. On the back, she had written, "You will be with Meow forever, Senpai." Again, I did what any rational person would do. I burnt the picture. In my mind, if it didn't exist, then it didn't happen. Makes sense, right? By this time, I really needed a drink. so I headed to the bar to forget all of this. Probably put back more White Claws than I should have, but you know how it is. After the first one, they're so damn smooth. Anyways, at some point, a woman sat down next to me, and for the second time in my life, she began to talk to me. Remember, I had never seen Chi out of her costume before, so I didn't know what she really looked like. We talked for a bit, and she encouraged me to drink with some silly game she had made up. It worked, and by the time I was ready to leave, which was probably about 5 drinks too late, I could barely stand. She offered to walk me outside and wait with me for a cab. We must have been out there for about 10 minutes before I finally slurred out the question of whether she had actually called a cab or not. That's when she looked at the back of her hand and began to clean herself with it. I tried to run, I really did, but I didn't get more than 2 steps before I fell over. I was in and out of consciousness, but I vaguely remember being dragged by my arms around to the back of the bar, lifted into the back seat of her car, and driven off. When I finally came to, I was on a hard bed in a bleak room with holes in the wall. I tried to move, and the cold bite of metal cut into all 4 of my limbs. She had me handcuffed. Once my vision came into focus, I let out a blood-curdling scream. In the corner of the room, there were some lit candles, what appeared to be a statue made out of raw ground beef, and hundreds of pictures of me. Some were me with my friends, some were of me at work, and a few were of me on my bed at home. The scream brought Chi into the room. She took one look at me and then went back out. She returned a few minutes later with a mouse in her mouth and a saucer of milk. Still completely silent, she slinked onto the bed one-handed, laid the dead mouse on my chest, and curled up next to me so our heads were next to each other. She took a few licks of the milk, stopped to look at me, and kind of motioned with her eyes down to the saucer. She then continued to lap it up for a bit, look at me, motion with her eyes, and lap again. Finally, I took the hint, and with tears streaming down my face and a soft sobbing from my throat, I began to lap the milk with her. This made her purr in a most frightening manner. Once we had finished, she began to lick off any cream that had spilled into my chin. After that, she bathed my hair with her tongue until she thought I was clean enough, then left, all without saying a word. No, she didn't remove the dead mouse. It laid there on my chest all night until she came back. This went on for a while. 3 times a day she would come in, dead mouse in her mouth and a saucer in her hands. She'd clean me, then leave. On the last day, I had a very large pile of dead and decaying mice surrounding me. Finally, though, she cleaned them up. She then wheeled in a television on a stand. For 6 hours we laid there, cuddled up, watching her favorite anime shows. By this point, I was so delirious with dehydration and malnutrition that I didn't really know what was going on. At some time, she had uncuffed one of my hands and laid it around her shoulders. I don't know much of what happened next. I just remember a moment of clarity after she had left for the night. She hadn't put my free hand back in the restraint. Whether she thought we had finally connected, or I was too weak to escape, or she plain forgot. For a brief second, things made sense again, and I knew what I had to do. The bed frame I was on was one of those cheap aluminum types, the ones with all the bars underneath to distribute the weight so they can actually hold something up. With my free hand, I began to move the mattress out from under me, just enough so I could get to the bars. Once I could do that, I began to break the bed apart 1 bar at a time. Once the frame lost most of its structure, I could bend and twist the larger outer bars. Finally, I got enough of the frame loose to where I could move more freely and stand up. I was still attached to some of the frame though, so that had to come with me. One arm was in the air and both legs couldn't do more than shuffle, but it was enough. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I made my way out of the room, being careful to duck through the door so my arm wouldn't hit the door frame above. Fortunately, I was on the ground floor. No way I could have made it downstairs the way I was. I would have had to fall down them. To make a long story short, I managed to get out without any incident. She had been out at work when I made my escape. I called the police and told them my story. They searched her place, and what they found still gives me nightmares. In her basement, there were the skeletal remains of 5 missing persons. They were all able to be ID'd. One of them was recently deceased. He had bite marks on his throat and claw marks all down his abdomen. The cause of death was disembowelment. Seems like she had been doing this for a while and just got a little sloppy with me. Her MO appears to be that she is super nice at first, but then she turns obsessed with her targets. She makes this whole scenario up in her head about a life with them. Once they're too weak to give her the life she wants, she gets rid of them and finds another victim. So when you hear in the papers about this anime nerd and how he fell for the only girl that he had ever talked to, how he destroyed evidence and didn't contact the authorities when he should have, go ahead, snicker and laugh all you like. Just know that I had my reasons, and I've learned a huge life lesson out of all of this.
Sorry about the length, but this happened ritualistically and periodically my whole life. This all started when I was probably around the age of 9, in the summertime. My brother was a year younger than me, and long story short, he convinced me to go look for some cats that he had seen. I put my shoes on and followed my little brother out the door. We walked the streets in search of the bastard kittens, completely unsupervised. We lived in a small town, and my mom worked at a Pizza King until 9 p.m. every weekday. My dad worked until midnight at Johnson Controls. That left our older sister, 13, to supervise, but she was always off doing God knows what. Because of these circumstances, I realized later we were perfect targets. Predictable schedules, lack of supervision, and comfortable in our own tight-knit Midwestern neighborhood. My brother led me about 6 blocks away when someone called out to us. I turned my head to find 4 young men leaning up against an old gray 2-door beater. They were standing outside of a known drug house, and they were smoking cigarettes, seemingly minding their own business. The one who called out to us, closest to the passenger seat, asked us, "Do you guys want some gum?" I stopped dead in my tracks, and my brother looked confused. They offered us gum? It was eerily reminiscent of our yearly stranger danger assemblies in the school auditorium. My brother and I looked at them for a second, but then turned around and started walking back the way we came, saying nothing. They yelled at us to stop, and we turned our heads and saw the driver getting into the car quickly, and the passenger pulling the seat up to let the other 2 in the back. As the engine started, we ran. We ran through the yard of a man whose lawn was always overgrown. We tried to crouch low and lose them, but that loud engine of the old beater was getting closer. It didn't occur to me that they could see the grass moving as we crawled through. We got up this time and ran at full speed, weaving in and out of people's yards to try to buy us some time. They followed. When I realized that there was no outrunning a car, we took a straight line to one of our neighbors' houses and started beating on their back door. The car sped out from around the corner and stopped abruptly in the driveway, so we abandoned that idea and jumped over her fence. We eventually made it back to our house and thought we'd lost them. My mom's voice startled me from behind. "Where have you been? Where's your sister?" I think she had come home because she was on a delivery route that day. Sometimes when someone messed up a pizza, the owners would let my mom take it home to us if she was on delivery, so that we had something to eat when the pantry was empty. I started to tell my mom what had happened, and she didn't look like she was too keen on buying the story, until I stopped mid-sentence at the sound of a sputtering engine. I looked outside, and the 4 men drove past our house slowly, looking in our windows, making eye contact and giving us a menacing look. My mom saw the men, tried to close the blinds, the track was broken but failed, and told us to stay inside for the rest of the day. She left after that. I can't explain why, so I don't ask, she just did. Later that night, still no sign of our sister, and we were hungry. We made some mac and cheese and put on Hannah Montana to get our minds off of things. Laughing at scenes that weren't funny, my nerves started to settle a bit. However, I kept seeing this tiny red light in the corner of my eyes coming from the window. I kept brushing it off. It could have been anything. After some time, I finally stood up and went over to the window to investigate, and saw that this red dot was actually the light to a video camera. I gasped at the sight of this, and he ran away immediately towards another man illuminated by the street lamp down the road. Naturally, I panicked and cried. I ran outside and screamed my sister's name as loud as I could and ran back inside. I called 911 first, then my mom, and told them that there were two men with what I thought was a video camera outside on the streets. The police showed up after circling the area and said that they'd stake out for a couple of hours at the house on the corner, but that the men would probably be long gone. They never found the man, but the man found us over and over again. A couple years later, my brother had the neighbor kid over for a sleepover. We all hung out in his room until late at night, laughing loudly and shooting BB guns at the ceiling and at each other. I left the room, and when I came back, my brother had told me that a hand had slapped the window and slid down, like in a horror film. I thought he was just trying to scare me, and I still believe he was probably lying. I was in the middle of telling him that he was full of shit when I saw a little red dot again, silencing all of us. We ducked to the floor at first, silent, unbreathing, and then my brother crawled over and turned off the light. We stayed there for a long time until waking our parents up, but they found nothing. I passed it off as a prank. Another couple of years later, in an insomniac-induced all-nighter, I was sitting in our sunroom with big windows all around with no curtains except for the one to my right, reading a book. It was about 3 in the morning, and the whole house was asleep. I had my headphones in, listening to my MP3 player, when I thought I heard a loud noise over the music. I looked up, startled, and saw a man at the door, watching me, at 3 in the morning. This is the closest I had ever been to him. I froze and stared at him. He was about 6 feet tall, and his hair was long and wavy over his eyebrows. It kind of looked like bangs or a comb-over without enough gel. He was wearing a white hoodie and long, blue pants that nearly covered his shoes. He looked like an aged version of the guy who offered us a piece of gum years before, and he had a big digital camera in his hand down to his side. He walked away casually, without fear or haste, maintaining eye contact, and I followed him with my eyes, past the window and behind the only window that was concealed with blinds. Out of my line of sight, I ran inside and told no one. I passed it off as a sleep-deprived hallucination for months, denying the nightmares and the cold chills, or finally came to the realization that this was the man I had seen years before, and I remembered something. The door's lock was broken. Those weren't the only times we caught someone outside of our windows. It happened for years, and it became an odd fact of life, but he seemed to be less interested the older I grew. It's strange, because he had always purposefully revealed his presence, instead of trying to stay discreet, and he even showed his face to me that one night. It makes me wonder what kind of pictures and videos he captured, and how long he would have watched before making himself known to us. I used to convince myself that these were several unrelated instances, because it scared me more to think that one person had the capability to invest that much time into us. It seemed like an odd revenge for outrunning him years before. If you're reading this, you are the reason that I keep my blinds closed and can never own a house plan or a sunroom. Creepy cameraman, if you're reading this, let's not meet. This happened in December of 2010 and was on the UK TV show Crime Watch. Liverpool, England. Mid-December of 2010, I was 16. I was off to school for the half term and was playing video games all day, basically. I live in a semi-detached 3-bedroom house, due to my bedroom upstairs being fairly small. My mom let me have the back room downstairs as my room too. This had things in it like my PC, reptiles, guitars. This also had 2 double doors backing onto the garden. One night around 2 a.m., I was playing World of Warcraft and using Ventrilo, talking to our guild friends. Pretty standard night. At this time, my sleep pattern was horrible, and I was staying awake all night playing WoW. I pretty much always have my back door a tiny little bit open to let some cool air in because of the heat coming from my computer at the time. This had never been a problem. We live in a relatively quiet area. Our garden backs onto a small wooded area, and only people I had ever seen in there were kids making dens or playing games, etc. With having headphones in, I couldn't really hear anything outside because of the game volume, but I remember something caught my eye a little. My PC desk is about 3 feet away from the double doors against the wall. Anybody outside would be able to see me sitting at the desk. I turned and see a hand opening the door. I froze and remember spinning around on my chair and ripping my headphones out. This would also be a good time to add that I was home alone. My mom and dad were at a wedding party, and I was fine with staying home. A man about 30 with a shaved head and a scruffy beard was standing at the door. We sort of stared at each other for a few seconds, and I asked him to close my door and get out of the garden. He very casually walked in and just stood there. I remember freaking out a little and standing up and moving to the other side of the room. I moved towards the shelf where I had a penknife and took it out and told him to fuck off. He said he knew nobody was home and asked me to let him stay on the couch until my parents' car turned up, and then he would leave. I was super freaked out and again told him to leave the house. He got visibly agitated and started walking around the room looking into my reptile enclosures. I told him to leave or I was going to ring the police. I remember not being as terrified as I should have been for some reason. It was only after I realized what a bad situation this was. He said something along the lines of, "I'll be able to stab you before you phone the police. So if you get on your phone, I've warned you." I remember going out of the room and shutting the door behind me and leaning on it so that he was locked in. I heard him walk to the door and try the handle. Then he started really pushing on it while screaming at me to move. I weighed up my options, and it seemed like the best option would be to run out the front door and knock on my neighbor's house. But my very small dog was asleep in my bedroom upstairs, and I would not leave him in the house with this person. I know my dad kept a police cosh in his cupboard in his bedroom, so I sprinted upstairs to find it. While rustling in the drawers, I heard him walking up the stairs. And through my parents' bedroom door, he was staring at me through the spindles on the staircase. At this point, I was panicking and terrified. He had a steak knife in his hand, and also which he raised up to show me. I had the kosh and a penknife, and we were similar sizes. He didn't move for a bit until I asked him to please go, because this wouldn't end well for one of us. He told me he would be back, and walked back down the stairs. I heard him go through my room, which he came into, but wasn't sure if he had gone. I slowly crept back down the stairs, but what made it even more intense is that for some reason, he had turned every light off. Before I got to the bottom of the stairs, I called the police while watching the door to see if he came. He didn't. The police arrived 10 minutes later, and my parents shortly after. They searched the woods behind my house, and in the fence facing my house they found some used needles, gloves, and a huge roll of carpet, and about 10 cigarette stumps all in the exact same place. They suggested he may have been watching me because in the dark he would have been in perfect view of a well-lit room through the doors. They never found him, but I never, till this day, leave my back doors unlocked anymore. Okay, so back when I was in the military, I was based out in California. This was pretty much right at the start of the housing bust, and I found myself newly divorced following a deployment. As such, I could no longer live on base and had to move. I quickly discovered that it was the same price or cheaper to rent a house instead of an apartment off base, so I got in touch with a realtor who worked with residents of a local gated community. As a newly single female with zero family in the area, I thought extra security could only be a good thing. I soon found the perfect house. It was amazing. Had a wrap around the porch with a view of the lake in the center of the community, had trees block my view of my neighbors, an awesome kitchen, I love cooking, and tons of local wildlife. I could easily see myself recovering from what had been an ungodly rough year. The owner mostly lived overseas, so I never really dealt with him, except when I moved in, but he seemed very nice, if a bit particular. He obviously loved the house, so I didn't think much of that. The 2 times I needed something looked after, his brother came to deal with them, as he was a handyman of sorts. I always found it a bit weird that him and his brother looked like they could have been twins. To the point where I thought his brother was him when he came to pick up the dryer when it needed fixing. Literally, he picked it up and carried it out in his arms. Funny thing about PTSD brain though, is that lots of normal things seem weird while strange things seem normal. So I never really thought of the landlord-brother situation as odd until after. Maybe it was normal, and the whole oddness of what happened is setting off my paranoia. I don't really know, but yeah, landlord odd. Brother was apparently the Hulk. Both spoke to me like I was their kid who needed very strict instructions. Anyway, I enjoyed my time in the house. My emotional support animal puppy loved it too because the next door neighbors had dogs for her to play with. But my PTSD and other mental health issues had me on a path headed straight for a medical separation. But then the president issued a series of rollback programs. A chance for military members to separate ahead of contract in anticipation for the Middle Eastern conflict to be abandoned. My commander highly suggested, if you're military, you know this basically means do this or else, for me to take the early separation. There were a few reasons surrounding this, but the main was that the squadron knew that they were the reason I was mentally fracked up. And there were more than a few people who had it in for me still at the clinic I was assigned to. Those people kept writing me up for things no one else got written up for. Examples of this: accidentally jamming the shredder that jammed at least once a week, leaving the front desk unattended while I was having an anaphylactic attack, having a panic attack which left work unattended because I was literally curled into a ball in the corner. You get the picture. Of course, my brain took most of the stuff at face value and figured it was okay. I deserved it. But my commander was trying to protect me as best she could and get me out of a clearly hostile work environment ASAP. So I applied and was approved for separation. Now this meant I was leaving my lease before the year was out. I forget if my landlord just decided to be nice, or if I had to pull out a law about military members being entitled to early release from a lease when their duty assignments changed. Probably the second one because he wasn't happy. I didn't really have the mental capability to care too much about putting him out though, because my scrambled brains all of a sudden had a lot of military paperwork and processing to deal with. Not to mention the fact that the whole idea that I was separating felt very surreal in the first place. I'd always thought I'd be a lifer. I didn't tell anyone of my neighbors I was moving out. Only one of my friends knew when exactly I was moving out. And even my movers didn't know exactly when because I stayed there on an air mattress for about a week after they picked up my things. I was camping my way across country on my way home, so I had a lot of stuff to move in my car too. To the best of my knowledge, no one on the base knew exactly when my house would be vacant either, because I'd actually stayed in a motel off base for a few days after I moved out, just to make the final days of last-minute paperwork easier. The house was about 40 minutes from my base, while the motel was 10. They knew what my travel plans. I was on separation leave for that time, which meant I was still technically in the military, and they needed to know exactly where I was. But I had marked my starting location for my trip as my base, not the house. What you should be getting out of this is that only 2 people for sure knew exact date I was leaving the house: my friend and my landlord. He'd likely told his brother and his realtor as well, but I'm not sure. That said, even my landlord didn't know the exact date I'd be leaving the area, just when I'd vacate the premises. My landlord had told me to drop my house keys in the realtor's mailbox, so that's what I did. And a few days later, I left on my road trip home. Now about a day later, I got a phone call from my landlord. I'm on the road with my pup, and when I answer, the conversation follows. "Hey, you left your camera here." "Are you sure?" Yeah, it's a Nikon with a nice set of lenses and camera bag. Oh, I don't have one of those. Really? My brother said you did. I tried to think back, and I remember his brother coming over to drop off, again literally with his arms, the dryer when my sister and nephew were in town. She's an avid photographer, and I figured she must have had the camera bag out in preparation for the day trip to San Francisco. No, I only had those Canons that fit in your pocket. You must be thinking of my sister's, but she for sure brought that home with her months ago. Landlord is silent for a while before. Well, what about the sleeping bag that's here? No, I definitely have my sleeping bag. Landlord again describes my sleeping bag exactly. No, I have mine. I slept in it last night. I stayed at a KOA campsite. Landlord again, quiet before answering. There's a backpack too, with a few random items. His tone changed to accusation. Do you tell one of my friends you could stay here for the rest of your lease? No. Only one of my friends knows exactly when I moved out, and he's visiting his wife who is deployed in Korea right now. Well, someone's been living here. At this point, it should have occurred to me how weird it was that he'd gone from friendly, "Hey, you forgot this," to angry, "You let someone squat here," so quickly. But it was only just getting through my head that someone had clearly moved in the moment I moved out. This house didn't have an attic, so it couldn't have been one of those, someone was living in the attic while I was living there and moved down into the main house later situations. There wasn't a sealed off part of the house where this could have been done, and even went into the basement on a regular basis. It's possible someone was living in the woods behind the house, but I have no idea. Anyway, my landlord wanted me to come over and check the stuff to make sure it wasn't mine. I told him that I'd finished up my paperwork, so I was on the road and already in Oregon. He clearly hadn't expected me to have already left the area since I still had a few days on my lease. Yes, it should have struck me weird he was already in the house, but I figured he'd pick up the keys and knew I was out. I told him he'd have to call me back after he figured things out. He never called back. I texted him later to follow up, but all I got was a short no response to my questions. No, they don't know whose stuff it was. No answer when I told him I was freaked out and wanted to know what had happened. Yes, he'd gotten both set of keys from the realtor. No, he hadn't found anything else. Not long after, I got full deposit back, which hadn't been expected since I felt bad for not staying my whole lease. I hadn't planned on asking for it. It wasn't until relaying this all to my mom later that I realized exactly how weird the whole thing was, or that my landlord might have been making up the squatter. She pointed out how strange it was that the guy who was supposedly traveling too much to use his own house would show up himself to walk through the house after I left. But before he picked up the keys or the lease was up, especially since his brother did everything while I lived there, neither of us really sure if he was up to something or if there really had been some extremely creepy stalker/squatter situation. Either way, the whole thing seriously messed with my already messed up head. So let me start this off with a little bit of background information. I was around 16 at the time of this encounter. My house is in a somewhat secluded area and sits in a good bit away from the road, with trees and thick foliage on all sides of the property. It was about mid-June and the trees were packed with heavy green leaves. I had spent most of the day relaxing at home, trying to escape the blistering heat by hiding in my comfy, air-conditioned house. It was on days like this that I really missed having a pool. Being rather bored, I decided to help the time pass by playing some games with some friends in line. After shooting the shit for a few hours, the sun was on its way down, and I decided that I should probably shut it off and make my way downstairs to check on dinner. By the time I had made it downstairs, my mother was just beginning to set the table. I helped her with the prep, and we sit down to eat. When I looked up from the freshly cleared plate, the sun had finally set, and once again, night crept in. Not ready to relax for the rest of the night, we cleaned the table and sat down for the movie night. But relaxation was shortcut by the familiar sound of my dogs barking and whining to be let out. I hurriedly jumped from the couch and made my way to the front door. Flicking on the switch under the porch lights, I grabbed the door handle, the cool metal in my hand being a much welcome sensation on that blistering summer night. Turning the handle and swinging the door open, I stepped out into the heavy night air. As my dogs tore past me, flying out into my dimly lit driveway before disappearing from sight, the cicadas buzzed their familiar song as I checked the patio chair for any creepy crawlies, before plopping down and wait for my dogs. After a few minutes, they came floundering back, stumbling over each other, as they pulled and tugged at one another in a gleeful, jovial manner. I stood from my seat and opened the door for my foolish little posse, counting each little ball of fur to make sure that they had all indeed come back, when I noticed that I was missing my little black Shih Tzu. Closing the door to make sure that the dogs didn't get back out, I turned and began to make my way towards my driveway, cupping my hands and bringing them to my mouth in order to amplify my voice. I opened my mouth to call his name, but before I can get any words out, the sound of a woman's voice stopped me. Faint at first, but slowly growing louder. I focused on her words. "Here, puppy. Come here, puppy. Don't be scared. I won't hurt you." My blood ran cold as the sudden realization set in someone that wasn't my family was on my property. In the middle of the night, I rushed back to the front door, flinging it open, screaming out to my mother, "There's somebody outside. Get out here now." Not wanting this person to have a chance to snatch my dog, I slammed the door shut and ran blindly into the dark, shouting my dog's name in a desperate attempt to get him to come back to me, before I suddenly tripped on something beneath my feet, slamming hard onto the concrete. As I rolled from my stomach onto my back, I quickly sat up and shoved out my hands in front of me, plunging them into the darkness. I felt the soft coat of my dog, realizing I had tripped on him. I scooped him up and stood on my feet, clutching him close to my chest. I began to desperately try to see through the dark, trying my hardest to find whoever was on my property. Suddenly, the dark was illuminated by the beam of a flashlight. As my mother made her way towards me, "Where are they?" she asked as she flung the flashlight wildly from side to side. I don't know. I heard it over there by the fish pond." My voice left my lips shaken, the adrenaline proving to be too much for my body to handle. My mother now focused the beam on the fish pond, scanning the surrounding area, looking for any movement, but nothing. She now stood beside me as we collectively began to make our way towards the top of the driveway. At first, nothing, but then suddenly out of the corner of my eye, I saw something white being barely illuminated by the outer beam of the flashlight. "There, right there!" I frantically shouted, jerking my finger in the direction of the figure. Where? My mother's words leaving her mouth, heavily drenched in confusion. "Right fucking there!" Adrenaline now fully dictating my demeanor. I snatched light from her hand and shoved it in the direction of the figure, just in time to catch the back of a woman in a white dress make her way through the underbrush before being swallowed by the thick foliage, completely disappearing from sight. "What's over that way?" my mother asked, trying to mask the discomfort in her voice. "The neighbor's house is through there, but that definitely was not one of our neighbors." At this point, my knees were wobbling, threatening to give out at me at any moment. I turned to face my mother, waiting for her to say something. "Let's get in the house and lock the door. We need to call the police." Hearing my mother suggest to call the cops was a surreal sensation, one that did not help bring any comfort to the situation. Not wanting to be out in the dark with whomever this woman was in white, we rushed back into the house, slamming the door and locking it behind us. Even at 16, I was a fairly big kid, standing at around 6'2" and playing football for my high school, but something about this woman was enough to send shivers down my spine. My mother grabbed the phone and rang the police, as I checked over our little dog to make sure that he wasn't hurt. After a lengthy back and forth with the police, they told us without this person being present on the property, there's nothing they can do. But if she shows up again, we shouldn't hesitate to call them back. After my mother ended the call, she proceeded to call all other close friends and family and break down what had just happened to us. After a long night of repeating the story over and over to friends and family, we finally decided to call it a night, making sure that all the doors were locked upstairs and downstairs. We headed to bed. I made sure that night to close my blackout curtains, in fear of walking to see this woman in white dress standing outside my window. Having things similar to this happen before, it was becoming trailing. The next day, we headed out to our local Home Depot, bought a few motion floodlights, as well as a few no trespassing signs. Unfortunately, this didn't solve the issue, and we would have to go to have many more disturbing encounters with trespassers. As for the woman in white, she never came back. At least not that I'm aware of. The only theory I have is that she was just some crazy lady on drugs, as unfortunately our area tends to have a high drug activity, especially where meth is concerned. I just don't understand why she would have wound up on a property, or why our property seems to draw in so many crazies. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. As for the woman in white, thank you for failing to steal my dog, and then never coming back. For the love of God, let's not meet. Hopefully this format's correct since I'm on mobile. I was told this would be the best place to post my experience, so apologies if not. These experiences took away 1 year after high school, and that was a while ago, so some memories are fuzzy. I, 18 female, was still living at home with my dad. I paid rent and worked full-time at a grocery store. My stalker, let's call him Dave, 18 male, was my emotionally abusive boyfriend at the time. He would constantly state how embarrassed he was of my looks and weight, and then flip the narrative and say how miserable he'd be if I left him. He would try to pressure me to cut ties with my family, and would pout when I declined. I was no shrieking violet, and eventually grew tired of the emotional manipulation. First experience happened while my dad was asleep for his night shift. Dave was at my house trying to pick a fight with me about not moving in with him. Something about the day woke up and I told him, I'm not doing this anymore. We're not good for each other and I want to be happy. Dave lost it. He started crying, and when he realized it wouldn't work, he kept trying to persuade me to stay with him. I told him no, and that we could remain friends. Wrong thing to say. And that he needed to leave. He left, or so I thought. 30 minutes later, I was making pancakes in the kitchen, and I heard my brother's dog, Paco, growling from under the porch. It was a deep growl, and I could tell something was off. I opened the door and found Dave hiding on the corner of the porch. He then bulldozed himself back into the house and told me he would refuse to leave until I was back with him. I began to panic. I didn't want to wake up my dad because I thought I could handle the situation by myself. I wasn't easily intimidated by men and was raised by a bunch of rowdy farmers. I told them I needed to use the bathroom, grabbed my phone and speed walked into the bathroom and texted one of my guy friends, let's call him Chris, and explained that I needed help. Thank God for Chris. He then dropped everything and drove over as fast as he could while I was stuck in the living room with Dave telling me we'll be moving in together. It was like nothing I said mattered. Chris walked in and told him to leave now or he'll be calling the police. Dave was cowering and booked it. Said he'd text me later. Second experience. This happened a week or so after I broke up with Dave, the stalker. I was on my way to work when I noticed my neighbor's car was following me all the way into town. I lived in a rural area, so it takes a good 30 minutes to go into town. Once I parked, my neighbor, let's call her Sally, parked her car and started waving her hands and yelling. I walked over to her, clearly confused. Maybe something was wrong with her car. She ran over and said, "That green truck has been following you." She pointed across the parking lot and sure enough, there was Dave in his pickup. Sally began to tell me she had saw the truck parked by my house, out of the view of the main road, and she noticed he'd leave when I left. Sally said she had seen it happen about 3 times, and she wanted me to know. She told me to call the police and hugged me and began yelling obscenities at Dave to leave me alone. I was shaking and thanked her and went in to clock in for my shift. I came out for my first break hours later and noticed he was still parked. I wasn't scared, no. I was furious. I did one of the dumbest things one can do in this situation. I stomped over to his truck and pulled his door open and began yelling at him to leave me alone. And if he doesn't, I'll kick his ass. Dave laughed. Some backstory. I'm a tall Amazonian of a woman and have been known to have a nastier scrapple when it comes to fighting. No matter how intimidating or angry I was, nothing I said was getting through to him. When he laughed, that's when the hairs on my neck stood up. I left his pickup and went back to work. I explained to a coworker what was going on, and he helped me to my car once my shift was over. Dave continued to stalk me for 3 more months, and I kept myself surrounded with friends and my taser. I eventually came out and told my dad. He was upset. I didn't tell him earlier, and he tightened security around the house as a result. I never did call the cops. Dave's stepdad was in the forest, and being in a small town, that gave Dave more leverage to go about with no consequences. I was finally able to shake him from stalking me when I got a new boyfriend, now husband, and that's a whole other story. My neighbor and friends were very helpful in knowing what I now know. If I wasn't warned by my neighbor or my friend decided not to answer my text, I probably would have been in a whole different situation. Maybe I'll share more encounters of Dave the Stalker in another post.
You know that uneasy, disturbing feeling you get when you sit on the toilet and it's warm because somebody else sat on it shortly before you? Yeah, I hate that feeling. The thing that makes it even more disturbing for me, though, is the fact that I live alone. It started about a week ago. I was outside on my front porch watching hummingbirds buzz around my olive tree and eating a bowl of ice cream. I love ice cream so much. Sadly, it does not love me back. Before long, I needed to go to the bathroom so bad, I was afraid I was going to brown my pants. I hurriedly threw my spoon, bouncing it off the side of the bowl and spraying ice cream soup onto the patio as I took off running inside and towards the bathroom. Before my cheeks even touched the seat, I was laying waste to the bowl. However, the moment I hit the seat, I froze. It was warm, as if somebody had just been sitting there. My gaze quickly leapt from corner to corner of the room, making a mental check of where everything should have been. Toothbrush on the right side of the sink, check. Yesterday's clothes laying on the floor by the door, check. Dirty clothes hamper on the other side of the room, closed, check. Having found nothing else out of the ordinary, I finished my business and assumed it was just my imagination before washing my hands. Although, as I went to wash my hands, I noticed the bottom of the sink was slightly wet. Not wanting to freak myself out further, I just assumed that the sink probably just had a slow drip, washed my hands, and left the bathroom. The rest of the day was uneventful, other than an unwanted call from my ex's friend Annie, whom I could not stand that pain in the rear. She had called to complain about me butt-dialing her the night before at 3 a.m., which, honestly, I didn't know how that was possible, as I had passed out drunk on the couch by midnight. As I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, I couldn't shake the earlier occurrence out of my head, so I brushed as quickly as I could and set the toothbrush on the right side of the sink before heading to bed. The next morning, I awoke refreshed and ready to start the day. I got up and threw some clothes on and went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. As I reached my right hand down to pick up my toothbrush, I realized something was wrong. The brush was on the left side of the sink, not the right. and again the sink was slightly wet on the bottom. Had I gotten up and brushed my teeth in my sleep? I thought to myself as I ran my tongue across my teeth. No, I definitely had not brushed my teeth, I realized as I felt the fuzzy buildup on my molars. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I ran to the phone and started to dial 911 before asking myself, what am I going to tell the police? My toothbrush was on the wrong side of the sink this morning? I would just sound like a moron, and they wouldn't believe me. Not being a gun owner, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife that I own before searching the house. I walked slowly from room to room, checking every cabinet, under every bed, every nook and cranny that I could find. However, I couldn't find a thing. Not a single thing out of place, not a single cabinet cracked open, nothing. I must be going crazy, I thought to myself. I then went to work, obviously now running late after having my freak out in the morning. I spent the rest of the day at work dwelling on the situation, going over everything in my mind, trying to remember where every item in my house is, so I could tell if anything was different when I got home. Upon getting home, I hesitated before opening the front door, afraid of what I might find on the other side waiting for me. As I walked in, I was greeted by a completely normal-looking entranceway. Nothing out of place. I did a quick run through the house and couldn't find anything had changed since the morning. Relieved, I sat down on the couch and turned on my TV. As I turned on the TV, I noticed it was on AMC. I couldn't help but question myself. Did I watch AMC last time I watched TV? Before chuckling to myself and thinking, man, I must be going crazy if I'm suspicious of even the TV. Before long, I started hearing a disturbingly loud rumble coming from my stomach. Remembering I had not even taken the time to eat breakfast this morning, I headed to the kitchen to get some leftovers out of the fridge. I opened the fridge and began to browse through the contents, looking for the leftover hamburger helper that I knew I should have from the other night. I could not find it anywhere. Discouraged, I closed the door and walked over to the pantry, removing a bag of popcorn. As I was putting the popcorn into the microwave, I noticed something odd. There was a Tupperware dish and fork sitting in the sink to the right of the microwave. Along the bottom of the Tupperware dish and sink were small traces of discarded hamburger meat and bits of noodles. At this point, I knew beyond a doubt that this wasn't my imagination, and I needed to do something. I once again debated calling the cops, but what would I tell them? I still had nothing tangible that would make them take me serious. Remembering the horror movies and stories I grew up watching, I decided to do the one thing that characters rarely do: buy a video camera. I then grabbed a piece of bread out of the bag on the counter and headed to the store. After purchasing the camera and picking up a few groceries, I headed back home. Upon walking into the house, I hurriedly opened up the box and removed the camera. Without even reading the instructions, I excitedly reached for the power button, knowing that soon this would all be over. Nothing. The camera would not turn on. Frustrated, I reached for the quick setup guide and opened it up. Step 1. Charge the camera. I immediately put my hand on my forehead and began to laugh at my stupidity. Of course, the camera needs to be charged before you can turn it on. I gathered up the charger, a cable, and plugged it into one of the open outlets in the living room for it to charge overnight. That night, I slept like a baby, knowing that the following day, I would have the capability to getting to the bottom of this mystery. Upon waking up, I walked into the living room, hearing a strange sound coming from my computer. I immediately felt all the blood run out of my face as I watched a video repeating on my computer screen. It was a video of me sleeping. As my eyes dropped in disbelief, another wave of terror ran through me as I read, "Nice try," written on a piece of paper on the keyboard. I am not even ashamed to admit I immediately ran out of the house and straight to my neighbor's house wearing nothing but my boxers. I think any sane person would have done the same thing under the circumstances. I did, however, freak out poor Mrs. Wilson. So much so, she frantically called the police, reporting that her crazed neighbor was pounding on her front door, shouting and wearing nothing but his boxers. Needless to say, that was an interesting conversation with the police, and I profusely apologized for scaring Mrs. Wilson. After telling the police my story, explaining the things being moved, the video and the note, they went in and searched my house. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl as I waited for the officers to find whoever was invading my privacy and taping me while I slept. And after what seemed like an eternity, the police came out of the house, mightily chuckling to themselves. They informed me there was no video playing on the computer, and no note. They asked me if I could go inside with them and show them the camera, to see if the video was still on the camera. As I walked into the living room with the officers, my heart sank as I saw the empty outlet where the camera had been charging. The camera and the charger were both gone. I shakingly explained to the officers that the camera was plugged in right there. They dismissively told me that if I noticed anything else strange to let them know, and for me to go get dressed and try to get some sleep. At this point, I wanted nothing more than to go and get a hotel somewhere else and not stay another night in my house. However, I am not made of money and I cannot afford a hotel. Therefore, I decided to do the next best thing and I slept in my car. I wanted to be able to keep an eye on my house, so if I saw lights turn on during the night, I could get the police to come by and show them that I'm not crazy. I, however, did not see any lights or movement around the house that night. Finally, tonight, after 3 days of sleeping in my car and not seeing anything odd happening in the house, I decided to move back in, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the person had left as to not get caught by the police and would not return. I did, however, sleep in the bedroom, with the door shut and locked, and a steak knife hidden in between the mattress and the bed frame. I awoke to a loud bang of a door slamming shut. Immediately, I called the police and reported that somebody was in my house. I could hear them walking through the living room, into the kitchen, and rummaging through my fridge. The operator instructed me to hide in the bedroom closet until the police arrived. I grabbed my knife and huddled in the corner of my closet behind some clothes. After what seemed like an hour, I heard 2 officers shouting for whoever was out there to put their hands on the wall. This was followed by crying and incoherent shouting from a woman. A few minutes later, I heard my front door slam shut. I hesitantly walked to the bedroom door and opened it slowly, knife in hand. As I walked into the living room, I was greeted by a bright light shining in my eyes and an officer shouting at me to put my weapon down as he pointed his gun at my chest. I slowly put my knife down on the table next to the door and proceeded to tell the officer my name and that I was the home owner. He led me outside to meet the other officer who was putting the woman in his squad car. After examining my ID, the officer showed me a copy of my front door key that she had somehow made. He then explained that the woman claimed I had given her the key and allowed her to come and stay at my house so she would not have to sleep on the street. I, of course, assured the officer that I had not granted her permission and most certainly had not given her a key to my house. After filling out my report with the officer, they left with the woman in the back of the squad car. Now, I'm here at my computer, unable to sleep from the night's, no, weeks' events. Emotional and physically exhausted. I guess I should feel safer now that I know that the woman has been terrorizing me is gone. However, I can't seem to shake the feeling that something is wrong. Have I just gotten so used to expecting the worst that now that it's finally over, I'm looking for something to be out of place? Now, as I stare at the empty table next to the bedroom door, where I put my knife, I can't remember. Did the officer take my knife?